All right. So, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Aurora. This is a great honor. Like I said, I've been a fan for a long time, and we've had a lot of interactions on Twitter, and it's just delightful to finally be on your channel.
Thank you so much. So we should be having people trickling in here pretty soon. And yeah, so I'm excited. You're my first ever special interview live stream that I've done so far on my channel. So you have the honor of this.
Hopefully I will be forgotten because much more famous people will come onto this channel and it'll be like, all right, who was that guy again? And that's good. But at least I started the process.
Oh, goodness. So how's your day going?
It's going well. It's going well. You know, yeah. I was excited for July 4th until they told us that we can't go to the beach anymore because, you know, there's a new rule every week, whatever.
Yeah, it's like every single day. I'm just getting tired of this. I'm getting tired of feeling like being a puppet with all the scenario and being told, oh, well, if there's a vaccine, then we can cure this. But then people can't create immunity to it. That's what I've heard before. But then what's the point of the vaccine then?
Yeah, well, that's the problem, is that because they're giving us so many stories and the stories keep changing that most people can't keep up, and most people don't have the information to make sense of whether it's logical. I mean, you know, someone I'm very close to is terrified of going out and has been saying, well, I'm not going to go out until there's a vaccine. And then they said to me, oh, you know, I think I got COVID back in February, and I said, good, then it's out of your system. It's good. You're done now. Like, no, but I think I could get it again. I said, well, then what for a vaccine for? I mean, because the vaccine works on antibodies, and they couldn't process it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that they're saying, well, you have it, but then you can get it again. However, wait till we get the vaccine, and then you won't get it anymore. So it's very confusing. It's I think it's just a way of like we're guinea pigs controlling the society. So
yeah, this is the greatest human social experiment in recorded history. Who knows what was happening in Atlantis before it all came crashing down? But this is what we know in our current historical record. And we can talk about Ancient Aliens at some point on this show as well.
Oh, yes, exactly. Oh, my God, my favorite show. When you were talking about that, and I was like, oh, crap, I haven't watched them in a very long time. But that is one of my absolute favorite shows as well.
Well, you know, it is the In Search Of for this generation. When we were kids, that Leonard Nimoy used to do this show In Search Of, which explored great mysteries and opened us up to maybe we don't fully understand history. And that's the purpose of that show. You don't have to accept their thesis that all of this is, you know, the pyramids were built by aliens or any of that. You just have to understand that our current understanding of history is just wrong. and that's where the mysteries are. So.
Exactly. So what got you into watching Ancient Aliens and all those paranormal shows that so what got you into that?
Well, I mean, I've always been interested in other realities. You know, I guess, you know, I'm a Sufi mystic. You know, Sufis are the mystics of Islam, and you know, before I became a formal Sufi mystic, I guess I always was one. And when you're a mystic, I think that's your paradigm from childhood, and I'm sure you've had that experience as well. You just see the world differently, and I think it's true for those of us that are artists, right? And you know, artists inherently, at least we hope, are able to see into a deeper level of reality. That's what we're trying to tap into as artists. And I think actually everyone is an artist. I think all children see that other reality, right? And that's why children, their imaginary friends are usually not imaginary. I mean, they're seeing other dimensional beings, and they have to be told that it's not real, and then it goes away, because then their paradigm changes. Like, oh, my friend who's been my little play friend isn't real, and then they vanish.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. And I think, yeah, like you said, we can all understand that aspect as a child. And maybe in your culture, in my culture, we believe that you know, the children choose their parents. The spirit of the children choose their parents. And they are so innocent when they're born, and even as a child, that they could still see from our realm and into the spirit realm. And so they could see a lot more like spirits and a lot more, you know, activities that as we grow up as adults, we stop seeing, because, you know, there's beliefs or whatever's going on in society. That veil is close to us in some aspect.
Absolutely. You know, and it's one of the great misfortunes of our modern Western culture that we have closed that reality in our sense of how the universe works. I mean, I think, you know, modern understandings of science have many wonderful things, but the dark side of them is that they, to use the word the dark side of them is that they limit the possibility of what's out there. Because what has happened in the unfortunate the result of the Industrial Revolution and the Great Enlightenment that is which America has evolved from, is that it threw out the baby with the bathwater, and throwing out superstition and false understandings of the universe that it was critiquing, the scientific revolution. It threw out the actual understandings of the universe because it became focused on a methodology to explain the universe that only explains a small part of the universe. The scientific method cannot explain things that are not replicable. It can't explain things that are not testable in a laboratory. And much of reality is exactly that. And so it just
Yeah, exactly. So we go straight into discussion here. So go ahead and introduce yourself some more, Kamran.
Sure. So I've been popping up on YouTube recently because I guess I have a big mouth and people are noticing it. But I've been a member of the Fandom Menace, or at least a passionate Star Wars fan within the community for a long time. My background is I was born in Pakistan and I moved to Brooklyn, New York when I was a little child, when I was 3 years old. And I grew up in New York City. And I've had a few interesting careers. I was a journalist for a while. I went to law school, went to business school. Put all that aside, and then I've been a screenwriter, a working professional, screenwriter, primarily a screenwriter, and a little bit of directing as well over the last 19 years. I moved to LA in April of 2001, and I've been doing this professionally since then. I've worked on a lot of television. I've written a bunch of movies that haven't premiered yet, so a lot of people don't know me yet as a movie maker, but they definitely know me as a TV maker. And so, and I've published a few novels.
All right. So tell us, like, what have you written, for those who don't know, and what novels, like for films or TV shows and books, what have you written?
Sure. Well, I'll focus on television. Like I said, that's what everyone knows before. I've worked on a lot of shows. I've actually worked on a lot of science fiction shows. So I started off my career in television on the remake of The Twilight Zone with Forrest Whitaker that was on UPN. And then after that, I worked on a show that was actually very important for my career and for my personal life and my philosophy. I worked on a show called Sleeper Cell, which was on Showtime Networks, and that got a bunch of Emmy Awards and Golden Globe Awards and all of that. And it was a show about a Muslim, and I'm a Muslim, and a Muslim FBI agent who infiltrates a terrorist group and basically defeats them from within. And it was a chance for me to show, the religion as I practice it. The vast majority of 1.8 billion people practice it, which is, the unfortunate reality is it's been projected onto us that this is a religion about violence and extremism and terrorism and oppression and all that. And that's not how we experience it. In the same ways, Hollywood had multiple generations of projecting false understandings of Native Americans, right? And and they got into people's consciousness, and that's been true about mine. So I was able to do that on that show. Like I worked on, like I said, other genre shows. I worked on the Bionic Woman remake on NBC. I've worked recently on the CW on the Roswell, New Mexico remake. I've worked on spy shows like Nikita. I worked on historical epics like Reign, which is about Mary Queen of Scots. And so I've had a very fun and varied career in television. In movies, I've sold a bunch of movies that haven't been made yet. One of the most important ones for me personally is a movie I sold to Warner Brothers, a script I wrote about the love story of the Taj Mahal. There's the beautiful princesses buried inside the Taj. We don't realize it's actually a tomb. And so the love story of that. And actually, I'm going to hop off and I'm going to show you my books. Hold on.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So
hi, everyone.
Yeah, these are my books. These are the two books I published. One is called Mother of the Believers, and it's a novel about the birth of Islam from the point of view of the Prophet's wife, Aisha. And the second one is a novel about the Crusades from the point of view of a Jewish woman who works as a spy during the Crusades. And so Shadow of the Swords. And so they're both books people can get on my website. I'm very proud of them. But yeah, and so that's my spiel of who I am in a very kind of.
Okay, so when you came to America as a child, compared to culture there and here, how was the transition for you growing up?
Well, it's interesting because I came here when I was very young, so I was 3, and so I do have memories of the time of my childhood in Pakistan. And I do actually remember getting off the plane for the first time. It was in January of 1976. And I remember getting on the plane. I remember telling my grandmother, because I didn't understand what was happening. I said, I'll see you tomorrow. I remember telling her that, right? I actually never saw her again. She passed away while I was in America. But I remember saying to her that I'll see you tomorrow. And then I get on the plane. I was, wow, it's a plane. I never experienced that. And then we landed in New York City in JFK Airport in 1976. And there had been a blizzard. And I'd never seen snow before. So I remember the doors of the plane opening and seeing just everything white. And I was blown away. I thought I'd be on the moon. It made no sense to me, right? This whole coming from Pakistan, Karachi is by the desert, right? And then you're now here in New York and it's in a blizzard. So it was
Talk about extremes.
Yeah, it was a very different experience. But yeah, because when you come when you're 3 years old, I'm an American. I grew up here. I learned how to speak English from watching Magilla Gorilla cartoons, right, as a little kid. So, that's, and watching Scooby-Doo. And so that's the one thing that makes me distinct in some ways is that, being raised in a practicing Muslim household, which was different for everybody else in Brooklyn for the most part, and has been different throughout most of my journey, and is different here in Hollywood. But I'm glad for it because it's given me, the core of who I am. And I think my work in Hollywood and obviously in publishing and everything else is try to promote, at least whether it's a positive or not, try to promote at least an accurate representation of my culture and heritage. And, certainly the inaccurate representation isn't positive. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I totally understand the inaccurate, representation. So I'm going to go there since, right now we're facing basically race wars and stuff, and behind like saying there's no equality and stuff. So growing up, did you ever face any type of racism or any type of being like, because, people seeing you as different?
Sure. And the way it works, especially with children, when children, first of all, reflect whatever's been taught to them, right? Bigotry is not natural to children, and they're taught by their elders and by society around them. And so, growing up, the first time I became really aware of being different was, actually very young. And it was actually watching TV shows like, it's funny because I was on the remake of The Bionic Woman, and the original Bionic Woman in the 70s with Lindsay Wagner was something that I loved, and I watched it. And I remember an episode of that show in which the villain were these Arab guys, right? And it was just the stereotypical, Arab guys beating his wife, and Bionic Woman has to come and punch him and whatever. And you're like, even as a little child, I was like, oh, okay, well, I think they're talking about my people, right? Even, Muslim people, right? And so, and then as a kid, all these historical events happen, like the Iranian Revolution. And so you go to school and people call you towelhead, and what's happening on TV, they're watching the hostages and they're blaming you as, you're 6, 7 years old. And these kids are just regurgitating what their parents are talking about at home. Mm-hmm. And so that's the experience you had. It was a defining experience for me. So yeah, but I'm glad for it, because at the end of the day, it's important. You don't actually recognize your identity until someone questions it.
Yeah.
I think you've had that experience probably, and then you come to value it. And once you see someone says something negative, you get to explore your identity and discover that's not true.
Yeah, exactly. And my experience here, being born here, and mostly my lineage, my blood comes from this very land, and my people's blood are in this land. Mm-hmm. And I think you can kind of understand the terms of that, being of the land where your people's blood is now in the ground and stuff, and shapes the land and everything. Mm-hmm.
It's a real thing. People think you're talking metaphorically. You're not talking metaphorically. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's a real physical thing in the reality of the human condition and our relationship with the earth.
Exactly. We have that connection with the earth. And, I believe, and we have our stories and stuff to where we are strictly from this land. And just like people where they come from, like yours, are strictly from their land. And that's where their roots, and that's where they grew from spiritually as well. And we are all tied to certain parts of the earth spiritually as well. But me growing up, and after, all this assimilation, reservation established and stuff like that, we are the only people in the United States that basically has to have a pedigree to prove who we are. And that's, per blood quantum. And now that we are supposed to be able to dictate our own nation as a sovereign nation, we still follow that rhetoric of, membership with blood quantum and stuff like that. So we then have that inner tribal or inner tribe racism, amongst our own selves, because
so you got that discrimination between different groups.
Yeah, if you're not full blood, if you're mixed blood or less than a quarter, then you're nothing. And so you have that. So I experienced that because I belong to, my dad is Sioux, my mom is Southern Ute and Apache. So I belong to 3 separate tribes. Mm-hmm. I'm enrolled Sioux, so I'm a part of the Sioux Nation as a citizen. And that's how I like to put it, as a citizen. Yeah. And
the Sioux is actually a nation. A lot of people, even today, United States don't understand. The natives actually have. Granted, it's a small portion of their nation but they have a nation and a land, and it's actually not the United States of America. It's independent. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I have dual citizenship basically. And but in the same land that as an American, in the same land, in the same, so I get it. And so from there I faced, intertribal racism amongst my own and amongst other tribes, and then on the outside as well. So it's a hard pill to swallow. It does shape us, and it does teaches us to look at the person as a human being, not as the color of their skin. Look at them as a personality, look at them as what they contribute to society, look at the values that they are raised with. Because when you break culture down, we all have the same values, no matter what we call it and how we describe it and how we live. We all have the same values.
Yeah, and no culture can survive if it doesn't share universal values. I mean, there's
Exactly.
always multiculturalism, but the reality is no culture's out there promoting murder. No culture's out there promoting child abuse, right? And so there have to be certain universal values that actually allow for the human civilization to continue and for reproduction to happen that have to work. It's part of being human.
Yeah, exactly. So we have Matthew got it here. Can you explain why Bionic Woman was canceled, the remake, or why it had 2 pilots? And so that is probably geared towards you.
Yes.
If you know anything.
Yeah, and so I actually enjoyed the Bionic Woman very much. I got to work with Katie Sackhoff, and I've been a huge fan of Battlestar Galactica, and she was Starbuck in Battlestar Galactica. She played the villain on our show, and I mean, what I can say is this: the pilot, went through the same processes that a lot of things in Hollywood went through. There was an original version of the pilot that had been sold, the idea of, and this is back in 2006, 2007, and we're gonna make Bionic Woman as a strong female. Bionic Woman was always I was strong female. I mean, I was Bionic Woman, right? But so but it was sold in Hollywood at this thing of like, we're gonna have a strong female lead here, and then I never read the original pilot. All I know is that whatever the version of it ultimately wasn't what the network NBC wanted to do. So they brought in other writers and they massively rewrote the pilot and made it into something else. And that was what was filmed, and that's what happened. And we had a situation where we had 3 very brilliant showrunners who were in charge. Each of them had brought a piece to the pilot. We had David Icke, who was Ron Moore's partner in Battlestar Galactica, so he'd come from the world of Battlestar Galactica. That's how Katie Sackhoff he had got involved. David had come to the idea of, after the success of Battlestar Galactica, can we remake Bionic Woman? And so he had sold that idea, and then the pilot had been written by a brilliant, or at least the version of the pilot that ultimately aired had been largely written by Jason Smilovic, who is a very respected writer. He'd been done a lot of movies at the time, and I don't think he'd done a lot of television. So they'd had him write the pilot, but when it came time now to actually run the show day to day, well, Jason hadn't really run a show before. Yeah, he did so subsequently, but before, so they're like, all right, and we said, well, David isn't really David wanted to be a writer and eventually wrote several episodes of Bionic Woman and other shows. But at the time, they're like, well, David, you've been a non-writing producer on Battlestar Galactica. You didn't really write for that show, so we're not going to let you be the head writer. And Jason, you haven't really, you've just written movies, so we're not going to let you be the head writer, right? We need somebody who's on television. So Glenn Morgan, who used to be the showrunner of The X-Files, was brought on board to be the showrunner, the head writer, and we actually had a large room. It was like 15 writers, and some of them been from X-Files. And as an X-Files, I was like, oh my god, I'm working with Glenn Morgan and Darren Morgan, who won an Emmy for that show, and so that was great. But the challenge was you suddenly had 3 different people who were each individually brilliant. You had David Icke, Jason Smilovic, and Glenn Morgan, each individually brilliant, each having a strong opinion of what the show was, right? And so, and there was not one person who had created the show who was in charge. There was 3 different people with different points of view. So that certainly created a lot of internal issues of what's episode 2 going to be. All right, and why is episode 3 so very different from episode 2? Well, because this person wanted to go this way. And so that internal conflict or that internal challenge we had of 3 different points of view and no one really clearly being the one who could shape it made that show hard to sustain. And so those of you who were fans of it probably noticed that the show had a lot of different tonal changes. One episode was very funny, another episode would be very dark. And those are the internal struggles of 3 different points of view. And the reason it was canceled ultimately was we weren't really able to reconcile those 3 points of view. Glenn Morgan was let go, unfortunately, and he was a brilliant writer, but ultimately, in that competition of points of view, he didn't win out, and so he was let go. And then the writer's strike happened, and when that happened, that essentially shut down the production of the show. So with all of this complexity in Hollywood, you can see it's like this weird omelet that's being made, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, the show couldn't survive that because you didn't have one person really in charge, and then there was a major strike. I mean, it was a challenge because I like every one of those people individually, and that combination with three opposing points of view was not a sustainable one, and so the show wasn't sustained.
Yeah, you have to have the same, like at least some kind of middle point for something to be successful. If you have 3 point of views going on, it's just going to go off wayward and stuff and not make sense and probably not even
Like
draw
Star
in.
Wars.
Exactly. Exactly. And we are seeing that now with Star Wars, and it's a heartbreaking, and it makes me long for the old lore, and that's what my channel is about, is the original lore, when George Lucas was behind the wheel, and proving everything that came out, and everything expanding through his creative mind, and we don't have the heart in it anymore, and that's what we're seeing, is there's no heart. There's corporate. The corporate doesn't have
it's all
heart.
up here, and none of it's here, and Lucas always went by his instincts, right? And that's why he touched our heart, because he was coming from that place.
Exactly. And he even made it a point to move his studio out of the LA area up north to stay away from all that corporate stuff and ideologies that Hollywood was starting to impress on, on the movie scenes and the creation of movies as well. So, yeah. Let's see here, Willie Woodward, damn straight OG Star Wars, got much more mad respect for you. So that was probably when I was talking about race and just seeing people as humans, and, and having that compassion. Personally, I think Lucasfilm is going to distance ignore the sequels. Okay, so I get what you're saying, and we'll touch into that in a few minutes or pretty soon.
And there was an earlier chat that we had on the screen about that, and I'll answer that question regarding what I think. Are they going to cancel these the sequels?
Yeah. So becoming a writer. So what made you decide to take the path of a writer and work in Hollywood? What made you decide that?
Well, I think anyone in this chat, who's an artist, and I know you're an artist. Artists know that they're artists when they're children, right? I think you probably develop your visual drawing skills very early on. It's just natural. We don't know. I mean, we don't know it's a skill. It's just what we do. It's how we express. It's how we play as children. And I was playing by writing short stories even as a child. I think the very first story I got published was in my school newspaper in 5th grade. It was a murder mystery. I was obsessed with Agatha Christie books, and I wrote a murder mystery in 5th grade, and it was good enough to get published in the school newspaper, right? And so, an artist is always that. And I was always, and as a child, I wasn't just writing short stories. As I've said perhaps in other places, I've said about how Star Wars was so important to me. It made me a filmmaker. I was so blown away by the original Star Wars movies that I would play with my action figures. I had my Luke Skywalker, my Vader, and all of those, and I would create entire movies. I would play out my fan fiction. I would create entire movies and they'd give them all these adventures that they would go on. And so that was my natural way of expressing was storytelling. And I just never thought I could do it professionally because I'm a random guy from Pakistan with no connection to Hollywood. I mean, how am I going to do it, right? And it was purely by the will of God. I never imagined this could be actually a realistic possibility. And I wrote a script, again, out of creativity. When I was bored, it was in business school. I was in an accounting class. And I wrote a teen horror movie script in that class just out of boredom because I couldn't make.
What a contrast! You're like business school and done accounting, and then bam, a horror script.
Yeah, I was like, I gave up. I couldn't make the balance sheet balance. I couldn't figure it out, so I just gave up. I said, I'm just gonna take. You don't really fail out of business school. You get a low pass, which is considered, you didn't do your job. So I'm just gonna take the low pass and ignore this class. And I spent all that time in the class writing this teen horror script. And when I graduated, I was working as a law firm in New York, and I sent that script out to a few agents, literally sent them unsolicited, because why not? And one of them actually really liked the script, represented me, and then I sold a couple of scripts to Paramount, and I couldn't believe. I'm not working full time as a lawyer in New York, and I just written these scripts, again to pass the time, and they were bought by Paramount. I couldn't believe it. This large check. I was like, "You got to be kidding me!" And I was like. I'm
onto something. I'm onto something.
And at the time, and I think you'll appreciate this very much. At the time, my parents had retired. I was taking care of them. I was the son. I have 2 sisters. I'm the one son, and I'm finally working as a big shot Wall Street lawyer, making a lot of money, and I'm paying their mortgage, and I'm taking care of them. And then I suddenly thought, maybe I can do this Hollywood thing. And I think one of the scariest moments is I went to talk to my mom, and I said, I'm thinking of quitting my job as a lawyer. Remember, I'm supporting them now. I'm quitting my job as a lawyer, and I think of moving to LA and doing this Hollywood thing. And I was scared she's going to say, what are we going to do? How are we going to pay our mortgage? We're relying on you. That's what I expected her to say. Instead, she said, I always knew you were going to do that. When you were a little child, like mothers know, right? When you're a little child, I would be cooking. She said, "I'm cooking in the kitchen," and you would come to me and you would tell me whole movies and stories, and they would all make sense. I could see them. I could imagine what you were saying, and they had a beginning, middle, and end. You were always a storyteller. I always knew you were going to do this. I'm glad you figured it out. And she said, "Just go to LA. God will pay our mortgage. We'll find a solution. It'll be taken care of." And that, I mean, that's what a mother's love. Like, she knew I could do it, and without that support, I wouldn't be able to do it. You know, and now here in LA, you know, my father has passed. My mom is still with me, and she stays with me. So if you see her walking in the background, that's my mom, and I take care of her now. And so it came full circle. I wasn't able to take care of her immediately in the first few years of my career. I was broke, and I wasn't able to send money home, and they lived off their savings or whatever. But now, you know, thankfully, I'm able to take care of her again.
Oh, good. And what do you have for those budding writers who want to write in Hollywood, you know, for films or, you know, TV sitcoms or whatever? What advice do you have for them from your experience, at least? Would you offer them?
Well, the advice is, number one, figure out what you're good at and focus on that. You know, this is general good advice for everybody. We all try to, you know, reinvent the wheel. And we look at, okay, I'm not really good at writing, but if I really try hard, I'm going to become good at it. But I'm actually really good at, like, if you give me a camera, I know how to do it. Or I'm really good with makeup, right? You know, and, you know, the great thing about Hollywood is whatever your skill is, I mean, if you're good at makeup, well, makeup artists make a lot of money, right? And they're often the ones that are closest to the stars. Like, the stars trust, in all the shows that I've worked on, the one person that the stars trust the most is hair and makeup. Because they're sitting there, and, you know, the hair and makeup people know everything. They know about their private lives. They know about their affairs. They are
kind of like salon people, where the stars will spill everything that's going on or hear every conversation. So that's the know right there. They are in the know. When you're not part of the business as a makeup artist and you do production makeup and stuff. Yes.
Yeah, and a good makeup artist is like a CIA agent. They don't say a word. Right?
Exactly.
You know,
and so that has to be there.
But, you know, to answer your question, first find out what you're good at, and then develop that skill. Don't worry about what you're not good at, because that's pointless. You know, develop whatever your skill is, and find other people in your life who fulfill the other part of that skill, right? Yeah. And so I'm a very good writer. I'm actually a very good photographer. The best thing is I'm a good writer. I'm a decent photographer, and you know, and so those skills allow me to do directing as well. But I'm not really good with sound and music and stuff like that. And so I need to have people around me who can help me with that. I need to have people that are very good with production, the areas that I'm not good at. And so that's how you differentiate. But specifically, anybody who wants to become a screenwriter, I have a very specific recommendation. You should read the book that I read, which is the book that I read, that I wrote my first 2 scripts, and I sold them and got agents and all that. And it's a great book. It's called The Screenwriter's Bible by David Trottier, Trottier. It's available on Amazon, and it will teach you everything. The Screenwriter's Bible. It will teach you everything about how to write a script, how to format it, and it'll teach you a lot about storytelling. And that's I eventually went to film school. I went to UCLA after I was a professional screenwriter, after I was working in LA and had sold scripts and was in the Writers Guild and was working professionally. I used that to get into UCLA film school, right? It's not easy to get into film school. You have to have like something. And I was like, well, I'm actually working in television right now. Oh, okay, we'll let you in, right? But I had gotten into television by just reading that book. Like, I had become a professional writer from reading that book. So anyone who wants to be a screenwriter, read the Screenwriter's Bible by David Trottier, and you're already on your way.
Nice. And so being in Hollywood and immersing yourself into the culture there and working, you know, and slowly working your way up and stuff, who have you met in Hollywood, actor wise, director wise, all of that, and who has made a significant impact on your life?
Well, you know, the interesting thing is, like all of us, we're all drawn to glamour, and like when we come to Hollywood, like, oh my God, I'm going to hang out with movie stars, and then you meet movie stars, and you're like, I don't want to hang out with you.
They're weird. They're weird,
and they're not the character on the screen. I mean, really great actors, and any one of you that's an actor in the chat, don't take offense, because no, it's true. Really great actors have a screw loose. To be a great actor, something's got to be wrong with you, right?
You have to be more than open-minded.
Yeah, you have to be crazy. And so when you actually interact with people, like, whoa, hello, okay, that's not eccentric, that's wacky. I'm not into that, right? And so, but you know, so I won't critique the actors that I've interacted with, but you eventually learn to realize, okay, you actually the awe of the actor fades away when you interact with them, and then especially in television where you're their boss. In movies, the director is their boss and the screenwriter is really on the side. But in television, which I've done a lot of, and I've been a producer of, you're the boss, and they look at you as the boss, and so that power dynamic changes how you see them, right? You no longer see them as in awe, and so that. But the great filmmakers that I've interacted with, I think the greatest filmmaker that I've had the chance to work with that really impacted me was Oliver Stone. It's on a project that you won't find. Yeah, you won't find him on my IMDb because you probably see Laura. When I started speaking out for the Phantom Menace, people said this guy's a nobody. Done Twilight Zone, Bionic Woman. What the hell? He's not connected to nobody. How can he know what's going on at Lucasfilm? This guy's a low level nothing, right? And my IMDb, you can like it or not like it. It is what it is. But not everything is on IMDb. And one of the most important shows that's not IMDb was a project that I did with Oliver Stone that never got produced. And I'll tell you why it didn't get produced. The project, Oliver Stone had gotten a show greenlit at Showtime Networks about Guantanamo Bay, about the terror trials at Guantanamo, like a drama. And I was one of the writers and producers on that show. I got to work very extensively with Oliver, and just like he's one of the great filmmakers of all time. He's an icon of mine, and I got to interact with him a lot and learn from him. That was very powerful. The show didn't get on the air, and why it's not on IMDb is because the show was one of the producers of the show was Harvey Weinstein. Mm-hmm. So, and all of this stuff that with Weinstein happened while we were there. So when all of this stuff came out, I was like, okay, I guess it's time to pack my bags. This show's not going to be on the air. The show didn't get on the air, right? Because, Showtime's like, well, disassociating from Harvey Weinstein. We're done. We're not going to do the show. Even Oliver Stone, who actually tried to be loyal to Harvey, he got into trouble when he said, I think that there's a lot of bad stuff going on in Hollywood. Why are we focusing on Harvey? And he got attacked for that, right? And the truth is, there's a lot worse people than Harvey. They're just, this current Me Too situation allows everyone to look at people like Harvey and ignore the others. It's sleight of hand, right? And
it's like they put on a veil. They put on a veil to hide what's going on and just focus on one area so you don't see the rest of the picture. Yeah. And so it's like it's very much a veil or whatever. So let's come into Star Wars now because the chat is like they want Star Wars right here. They want Star Wars talk, and so with what's going on in Lucasfilm right now, what is your take? I know I've heard it before, maybe other people have, but we might have some new people in chat that may not know what's in the know. So on your end, what have you experienced or heard or seen?
Well, I have not worked with Lucasfilm. I've met Kathleen Kennedy once early on in my career. She was actually very nice. I don't support what the direction she's taken Lucasfilm in. And I'm very public about that, but I don't have a personal problem with her. There's a lot of very nice people that are making wrong creative choices in the industry. That's how the industry works, right? And so we'll set that aside. But I have several friends who have worked at Lucasfilm. I have friends who actually were going to write or at least were up to write the Boba Fett movie, right? And I remember them coming in after Solo failed and saying, the movie they just pulled the plug on Boba Fett. We're out, right? And then 3 days later, it got announced Boba Fett wasn't happening. And so I heard it directly from the people at the center of it, right? So I have that level of connection. And because of that, I get to hear inside. And, we see my lovely friend Stephanie Janicek's, comment here. She's right. I've heard from people who know Lucas personally who have told me Lucas has said, The Last Jedi is soulless, that he was just shocked by the movie and it was the ultimate, it was the moment when he realized that there was no saving this thing. He had been disappointed with The Force Awakens. He was actually been vocal about that disappointment. He didn't say anything about The Last Jedi because I think the lawyer said to him after Force Awakens, boss, you gotta quiet. You don't want $1 billion lawsuit from Disney for hurting their brand, right? So he became quiet. And all he said about The Last Jedi was it's a beautifully made movie. And yes, it is a beautifully made movie. Cinematography wise, it's stunning cinematography. It's just not a good story.
And what's so crazy about that, or maybe there's an irony to that, is that what we see now going on with movies with the CGI and how they're made basically was what George Lucas brought to the forefront, him and those who worked with him at the time, because we look at Pixar Pixar was a production or a creation of George, and then when it was sold off, it was named Pixar. So everything that we see that's groundbreaking was what George and a few others who worked together brought forth to the forefront of Hollywood film experience. And so, yes, he recognizes that, and it's beautiful because he's basically the papa of that. If you look at it.
And he is the papa. And so I want to actually go back to the earlier question that we saw and some of the people asked as well. Do I think, Doomcock and others have said that they have heard that there's a plan to decanonize episode 7 through 9. A lot of people think that's impossible. I think the great movie commentator Grace, she came out and said that they're just going to ignore those, but they're not going to decanonize them. I don't actually think so. I think once Ms. Kennedy moves on, which is going to be in the next few months, and once Bob Iger has officially is out of the picture and Bob Chapek is really in control, I do think it is possible and perhaps even likely that they will decanonize 7 through 9. They know what a massive loss they've made. They've had the economics of it. I mean, they've had several years of it. We have a sense that Star Wars is off track. People who are looking at the accounting numbers inside of Disney know it's off track, right? They know what they're projected. When they bought the company in 2012, there was a projected revenue stream that those accountants have come up with. And with The Force Awakens, it looked like it was going to hit those targets. And then The Last Jedi didn't hit that target. It wasn't supposed to go from 2.1 billion to 1.2 billion. People have said that's what they were expecting. They weren't expecting that. They were expecting, like Avengers, for it to go from 2.1 to 2.5 to 3 billion. That was the expectation of the trilogy. And that was the only way they were going to make a profit on it. Because, the one thing that a lot of people don't understand about profit in Hollywood is this concept of amortization, which is, again, that's the only thing I remember from my accounting class while I was writing my horoscope, right?
You're like, I understand that. Yeah.
So let me explain it as a guy who doesn't understand accounting, right? But the basic idea is this. I buy Lucasfilm for $4 billion in 2012. Or I take that $4 billion and put it in a savings account, right? In an interest-bearing account. If I just leave that $4 billion in an interest-bearing account, and let's say I'm just making 2 or 3% interest on that, then in 10 years, that's going to be about $6 billion or $7 billion. It's going to, because of compounders, it's just going to increase, right? And so knowing that that's the baseline, that I have to make $7 billion within 10 years, Leslie, I have to have that kind of number in my bank account to make sure that I've met the minimum that I would have had just by putting in the savings account. I got to make sure this company I'm buying Star Wars generates enough money so that at the end of 10 years, instead of negative $4 billion in my bank account, there's positive $7 billion in my bank account. The problem is, and that's where the standard should be, because that's the savings account number, right? Now, the problem is once The Last Jedi underperformed by, $800 million, actually probably closer to well over $1 billion, because they're expecting in their projections to be a $2.4 billion movie. That was their goal. And then the toy sales started, the toy sales started collapsing, right? And then the parks didn't work out. Suddenly, that bank account, which should be at positive $7 billion, is at like positive $2 billion. So they're still below the 4 that they invested, right? And they haven't made the difference. They're at least 4 or 5 billion where they're supposed to be.
Yeah, they shot themselves in the foot, and when they first shot themselves in the foot, it's disregarding the original lore that was made off of the films, and that alienated a lot of fans that kept Star Wars going between the movies and even after the movies were done, all the way up until now. And so when you alienate your customers, there's a problem there. There's a huge, huge problem there. And then we get, The Force Awakens, which was a 2.0 of A New Hope. And so there was potential there. And then when people who grew up with Star Wars and how Luke Skywalker evolved and how a lot of the characters evolved and how the Skywalker legacy evolved, when that gets flipped on its head, that, those people that they alienated are pissed now. And then it again affects even movies that they brought out, like Solo, that really doesn't have really that much ties to the saga other than he was in it at one point. That creates problems for the sales with that creates problem for the sales with the toys. And then when you have Kennedy say, oh well, we're gonna put Luke in the back shadow, the back side there because he outshines Rey, our character, that again alienates. And so all the stuff that they're saying and all the stuff that had happened, even with directors talking up against the fans, that's what creates the problem. That is not a good marketing strategy, really.
All of this was disastrous. And like I said, I've been to business school. And so here's the funny thing. Right after The Last Jedi premiered, and I was still reeling from shock from it, I was like, what the hell is this, right? What the hell has happened here? About 3 weeks after that, so that was like December-ish of whatever, 2016, whatever it was, right? And then I was invited to come back to my old business school at Dartmouth in New Hampshire, which is where I got my MBA, where I wrote my first script. I was invited to give a talk there, and in my talk, I talked about The Last Jedi. I talked with business MBA students at an Ivy League school. I said, if you want to understand how not to run a company this is what you can't be doing, right? You can't. I said Lucasfilm, and this is before the Last Jedi, before people understood how bad the Last Jedi's impact was. This was in January, but I was just talking from my own personal pain. But I knew what was coming is I'm not interested in. I remember posting on Facebook a few days after the Last Jedi saying I'm not interested in Solo anymore. I'm not interested in Episode 9, and I'm shocked. I don't want to buy their toys. I don't want to do anything. And I'm just out now. And I said that 2 or 3 weeks later, and I later discovered millions of others that said that. So I knew then that something terrible was coming. I said, you cannot buy an established franchise with this passionate fan base and then do this with it. And I gave that as a lecture in business school at Dartmouth, right? And here we are 3-4 years later, and everything I said, I even said at the time that there's going to be business school cases about mismanagement. And then about 18 months later, Forbes was pointing out that people are talking about this in the business school community, that this is a disastrous mismanagement of Lucasfilm. And so being prescient is hard because everyone thinks you're crazy. I was like, but that's what's coming, guys, and that's what played out.
Yeah, and do you think that Bob Chapek, if he gets in there after Bob Iger leaves, do you think that he will save it or he will do recourse on it? What is your opinion about that?
My opinion is that once Kathleen Kennedy is out and once Bob Iger is out, then I think the board will at least entertain the possibility of selling it back to Lucas, right? Because they're in such a massive, massive hole right now. And I said this about a year ago, and I think Stephanie Janicek's here, who's a friend of mine. We've talked about this. And I talked about this about a year ago, and this is no one is putting in my ear that George Lucas is thinking this, but I'm thinking this, and I'm not as smart as George Lucas, and I'm not yet a billionaire like George Lucas. And so if I'm a billionaire and my life's work has been ruined by someone else, I'm going to do everything possible to take control of my life's work so that its legacy is on the right track before I pass on, right? And so if I'm thinking this, I know a man who has strategically been ahead of the curve by 50, 60 years before everyone is thinking this. So I think that it's bigger than people realize today. People are talking about decanonizing episodes 7, 8, 9. I believe that's inevitable. I think Bob Chapek will do that. I think that in fact, I knew they were thinking of that when I first encountered the Veil of the Force stuff, this alternative dimension, that's how they saved Ahsoka Tano from being killed by Vader. Ezra pulled her out into the Veil, right? That's what happened. And I said, well, because again, I'm a screenwriter, I'm like, that's a setup. They're setting up something, do something like that that's completely adding this new universe to Star Wars 4, unless you're going to use it. So what's the payoff? It's like Chekhov's gun. You don't pull out a gun unless you're going to use it, right? And
exactly.
So they're setting this up. They've done this because they're going to create alternative timelines, because that's what the Veil of the Force does. I knew that the moment that episode premiered that they were going to do that.
Yeah, and I
created that episode.
Yeah, and I think that like with EU fans like myself and stuff, I think that was kind of a distaste because we know the heart of George Lucas's Star Wars was it was all one universe and one lore, and he's gotten like world records for creating a fantasy based upon one lore. So for some of us that didn't see the bigger picture at that time, maybe we're like, what the hell's going on here? We can't have this.
You thought they'd mess it up. You thought that they would screw this up even more, but I knew immediately this is done on purpose. This is being done to create a way out. I knew that when I first saw the idea, and I liked that episode. I didn't hugely like Rebels. I loved Clone Wars. I didn't like Rebels that much. I thought it was too much for children. It wasn't really what the caliber of the other Star Wars stuff, which children could like and adults could like. But the stuff with Ahsoka Tano and Vader was great. And then I was like, oh, I know what they're doing here. And so when Doomcock announced he heard this internally, I was like, yep, I knew that like 18 months ago, right? Because that's the Chekhov's gun. They're pulling. But of course, Kathleen Kennedy's going to fight that, because that's unraveling everything she tried to do with this franchise. But I don't think she has the political power to fight it. I think she's on her way out. And I think they're just going to be patiently, yes, madam, to her until she's gone. And then they will rapidly accelerate. I think the moment Kathleen Kennedy has officially left the building, they will rapidly accelerate a new Star Wars plan. Because nobody in Hollywood actually cares what it does to canon. They don't care about canon. They proved that by you're the passionate queen of the EU. They don't care about canon. They took the entire EU, which was great, and threw it all out. They could throw all this out again, which isn't great. They did it before for something that was good. Why would they do it for something that's not making them money? It's a business decision.
And that's my thing is if they could do it to the original lore that's based upon the movies and continued the movie and the lore plot and created such a wonderful universe that made us fall in love with Star Wars, then they can do it to their own stuff. And so now they're going into like a Marvel or that type of universe, of a multi-universe, to do that. And a lot of us, or not a lot of us, but myself and there's some others that think, oh well, Star Wars is never a multi-universe, and it was brilliant that way.
Just take the win. Take the win, Laura. Just take it.
I know I am, but it's just the thing. It's like let me just get my feet wet here, and let me just figure this one out.
I'll let you say it. Okay. No, but but look, it's because you are a purist, because you understand that and then, there's some minor contradictions in the EU, which I'm sure you know better than I do. But it's basically a consistent lore that works off the mythology that George Lucas created, and it's massive. I mean, it goes back hundreds of years. It goes forwards hundreds of years, and it's all connected, and it makes sense, right? And so that, and to take that entire universe and throw it out, one has to treat this entire Disney experience as that scene from Dallas, when that whole season was just a dream sequence that Pam had. She thought Bobby had died, right? And at the end of the season, she sees Bobby in the shower and he's alive, right? And he discovered almost a dream. And we have to treat all of that way. This was just a bad dream. And from the financial point of view, it's a bad dream for the people at Disney. This wasn't supposed to be this way. They were supposed to have $7-8 billion in that account. They don't.
Yeah. And the thing is, so with this and the direction that they're going, why not? And I mind you, I know people are like, just get rid of the sequel trilogy or the Disney trilogy. I know that's the talk out there. And me, I'm like, in a way, I'm seeing this with the compassion. Okay. So I'm using compassion with this because
Native American compassion. I love it.
I'm going there. And some people may not agree with me, but just hear me out. I know people want that erased, and I know that it wasn't a good moneymaker as well. But I do understand that there are people who love the lore that was evolved from that. And I understand that there are some characters that people love that evolved from that. And so being a expanded universe lover, from the original lore, and seeing ours tossed aside, saying it's no longer valid, I really don't want that to, people to experience that on their end with the lore they love. And that's where my compassion is coming from. However, I do understand, if that's a company's decision, I do understand, because we're not talking about independent studio anymore. We're talking about corporate, and it's all driven by money. All driven by money. So the heart is out of there.
Now, it's not impossible what you're saying, that they will keep. This is what I do think. I do think they will decanonize it. I do think they will make this Legends, right?
And that's the thing that doesn't fit in that lore.
The thing is, I don't know that they're going to go back to the EU and go back to the early Thrawn books. They might keep that Legends too. So that was alternative universe A. Rey is alternative universe B, and now we at Disney are going to create alternative universe C, which the Mandalorian is part of, and whatever stories they develop off of that, right? Mm-hmm. That may be what they do. If I think they may have a transition moment in order to keep the outrage from someone, because these people, while they're not fans, they create a lot of political drama. The TLJ types, right? They create a lot of drama online to make at least minimize that drama. They may do. We're going to keep cranking out books in the Rey timeline, right? And they may do that. I don't think that those products will be commercially profitable, and so even if they do that, after a few, they'll just fade away, because the attention will be on the new official timeline, right? And eventually, those people will, the supporters of the old timeline will just not have. I don't think they're as passionate as we are, like we are for the EU, and I just don't think they'll bring Disney the money it needs. And then, if ultimately Disney isn't getting the money it needs, I do think it can sell it back to George Lucas, or whoever George Lucas designates as his successor, probably Jon Favreau. If I was Lucas and I'm thinking I'm not going to be alive to see the buyback, I can still set up a business, entity with Jon Favreau that can take it on as my successor, right? Yeah. And then even if I passed away, there's a few $1 billion in that account and can be used to buy back Star Wars, controlled by Favreau or whomever he chooses. There's ways to do that past your lifetime.
Yeah, exactly. But do you think there's also a possibility of actually keeping it, but then making another trilogy to where it goes back and maybe has some kind of like Sith? I'm just going in what if scenarios now, but like going and saying like, oh, well, that what had happened was maybe from the veil, maybe we'll use that, or are going back to like Sith alchemy to where, Palpatine, he was known in the PT to cloud the Jedi's judgment. Since he was brought back, maybe he was clouding the judgment and reality, and after he was killed, it reset. There's many possibilities to go. And I'm, like I said, there are people that don't want the sequel trilogy to exist anymore from what it did with Luke and the lore and all that. But I'm just, as a fan and knowing the lore, I'm just like trying to play out these scenarios and what they can do or what they might do.
The problem is you're smarter than all of them, Laura. That's the problem. You're smarter than all of them. They're not thinking this deeply. Maybe Favreau is thinking this deeply, but even then, he just wants to get the ship off of the iceberg, right? That's all he's thinking about, right? That's why Mandalorian people critique it. It's pulling the ship off of the iceberg and trying to patch it up. It's not going to be perfect, but it's better than sinking, right? So I don't think anyone is thinking in the system as deeply as you are, right? I just don't. I wish they were. I wish they I don't think that Star Wars, whatever that group is, that story group, I don't think it exists anymore. But I don't think those people understood the lore as well as you do. And so I think they're just going to go with whatever quick, veil of the Force, veil of the, okay, we're in a new story now, and away we go, right? And I think that's what they're going to do. I actually think within a generation, if they're able to save this enough that people like you and I come back with our hearts, then I think in a generation, they may cast new actors to play, Luke and Leia, and that's not great, but we've lost Leia, we've lost Carrie Fisher, God rest her soul, and if they can get the story correct, I'm okay with continuing on a generation from now, the Skywalker legacy with new actors, right? Even today, people talk about Sebastian Stan playing younger Luke. I've worked with Sebastian on things. He's one of the best actors I've ever worked with. He's a great guy. And so, it'd be great. I'd be cool with him I take that. If the story is good, I'm good with new actors continuing it. I think Solo, again, I didn't see the film. So, and I know my friend Stephanie Janicek is passionately against the gentleman who plays Solo.
We need Anthony in there. Anthony, who played a young, Indiana Jones. That was a total miscast right there. A total miscast.
It was. And again, that was just because of political relationships. This gentleman who played Solo in the movie, he was one of Steven Spielberg's proteges, and so as even those the two gentlemen who were fired from Solo, right, had said, they met with him first because Kathleen Kennedy's like, you got to meet Steven's guy. She was his gal, right? We got to meet his guy. So they met his guy, and then they met 1,000 other people, literally, and they come back to Steven's guy because that's what they got to do politically, right? And so it was never really about who's the best person. It was always going to be Steven's guy because that was Kathleen's relationship, right? So I think if even if he had been cast, if we didn't all hate The Last Jedi that much, except for maybe Stephanie Janicek, I think most of us would have been fine with Solo, with his new guy Solo.
I don't like Solo either.
If The Last Jedi wasn't garbage and we're all excited, we would have gone with it.
I would have. I love how his story was written in A.C. Crispin's Han Solo trilogy. I loved how his name was basically an influential name on Corellia, and I love the way he was raised in the crime syndicate by a Wookiee, and that's how he can understand her. I love how he rescued Chewbacca. There's a lot of things that they tried to kind of mirror in there, but it just didn't come out right, especially Han Solo's last name and the legacy that it brought to him with the planet he was born on. And it just made him a nobody.
Yeah.
And I think Stephanie could probably agree with me on that. It was they just bastardized him in the Solo.
Again, and that was the bad storytelling. But we were already primed. I said I was interested in seeing Solo until I saw The Last Jedi, and then I was done with the whole thing. I didn't see Solo. I didn't see The Rise of Skywalker. I was done, and I kept to that. I've never seen them, and I don't plan to, right? And so had they not done that to me at Last Jedi, I would have gone along with it, and maybe I would have accepted. And as Stephanie said in the chat, his name is Alden Ehrenreich, whatever that Mr. Ehrenreich, whatever that guy, right?
Yeah, Alden, whatever.
I would have accepted him. Because from what I understand, the story wasn't terrible. Right, he's a hobbit. Okay, the story wasn't terrible from my friends who've seen it. Right, my friends have never said to me that it's a terrible movie. They just say it's fine. It's sort of forgettable. It's, there's some fun moments. There's some nice hyperspace stuff. Whatever. Okay, the acting's not bad. Yeah, but I expect more from that from Star Wars. But I wasn't going to go see it, and they ruined that for him. They ruined his opportunity by screwing up Last Jedi so badly.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? You know, even if they just ignored the sequel trilogy and just left it intact or whatever, and they skipped all the way to like 100 years after that, like we see with the legacy comics right here with, you know, Cade Skywalker. I think that would be a good approach because then they can start off with totally new Skywalkers. Maybe if they want to still introduce Skywalkers as a significant family to the universe, and they could still expand on the stories and show us like what's going on in the galaxy 100 years later. And I think that's what they should have done in the first place. Really, I think that they should have just
Yeah,
left
yeah.
the happy ending.
And the mistake they made is they didn't do that because of, well, they're still alive, so we got to get them, but they didn't bring them together, so it made no sense. You know, the actors at the time, all of them are still alive, and you're like, you know, we got to get Carrie Fisher, we got to get Harrison Ford, you know, we got to get Mark Hamill because they're alive, so let's get them together. Everyone wants to see them. Well, then you didn't get them together, and you screwed up every one of their characters.
Yeah, Anthony. I mean, what's his name? What's his name is a Hobbit. Yeah, I can't think of his name right now. and the thing is with, you know, like for those of us who really got passionately involved with Star Wars lore and the actors and seeing them evolve into the novels and stuff, you know, we grew that attachment and we grew with their story, and we still see Luke, you know, see trials and tribulations, failures, growth. We seen him correct the Jedi Order and name it, you know, now it's the New Jedi Order, and allowing marriages and stuff like that, which help correct the direction that the old Jedi Order, you know, from the old Jedi Order. We see
they had become dogmatic. I mean, they had become dogmatic. Mm-hmm. And you know, as a student of religions, I mean, because that was what I studied in college, and that's what's so fascinating, right? It's exactly that. Is that, you know, I'm going to give you my interpretation, as you may have a strongly different interpretation. But my interpretation of the prequels is, I mean, and we saw Mr. Rian Johnson came out with his interpretation. That's it was children's films about fascism. I was like, no, it wasn't a children's film. It wasn't about fascism. It was about something very different, right? It wasn't.
Yeah, exactly.
But it was about fanaticism and corruption and blindness, in my view. I mean, the Jedi created this situation where one dude can outsmart all of them. One dude with an apprentice, right? Because they had become so smug, they had become so locked into their dogmas and their rules and their belief in their own invincibility that they were essentially violating the ethics that they had allegedly been following for many generations. And so the Force abandoned them. There's actually this pivotal line there, which a lot of people forget, where they realize the dark side is clouding everything. And you know, and one of the Jedi says, I think we need to tell the Senate that our connection to the Force is weakened. That's the clue line. The Force is abandoning them. You know, the Force has said, you are not worthy. You are people that have misused the Force in your own pretense. And Anakin Skywalker, you're abusing this kid. And instead of nurturing and helping him, he was your chosen one, and you abused him, and you abused his apprentice, and you have proven unworthy, and so we're going to wipe you out. We're going to use a Sith to wipe you out, and then Anakin's going to get rid of Sith, right? Because that's how the Force is going to balance itself out. The balance was getting rid of one corrupt, and this is actually interesting because, you know, I've said this on, you know, I'm a Muslim, and so I'll use a Muslim thing. With all these stupid revolutions that are happening right now, everyone's setting fire to this world, there's an old Islamic saying, God will punish the unjust through the unjust, and then he will take his vengeance on both. That's the prequels. The Jedi had become unjust. God punishes them through the Sith, or the Force punishes them through the Sith, who are themselves unjust, and then removes them too, right?
Yeah, and that goes. Yeah, and that goes in the prophecy of the chosen one, also, which led to his children also being the one that were the catalyst of the prophecy. And so it goes into mythology so perfectly that any person of any culture can, you know, put that in their own cultural experiences or their own life experiences. And so we see, you know, like after Return of the Jedi, we see Luke, and now he's like, you know, I need to further train like my master. And again, he doesn't know that much about the lore, because a lot of things that Palpatine did was even destroy some of the lore. And then his discovery of it, you know, even with the Clone Wars, will you knock it off? Some of it was still hidden. So even his father's story as Anakin Skywalker was towards the end was destroyed by Palpatine, because, you know, again, he was the mastermind of the Jedi fall as well. And then, so when we get the new Jedi Order, like I said, we get everything that's corrected and how it's supposed to be. And with Luke in the forefront of being something his father was, or being what his father was supposed to be. And then now we get Luke Skywalker, who was totally just gives up on the galaxy, does not have no hope, gives up on his friends, gives up on his family, gives up on his religion, the Force, everything. And that's what really made everybody off from, you know, the experience.
That's right. It's not the natural progression of that character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know? I mean, there could have been the trilogy that I imagined that I think could have worked if they wanted to go down this way. Said if they threw out the Thrawn trilogy and everything else, which I would have preferred. If they had asked me, they said to me, Cameron, we're throwing all that stuff out. We're not using EU. It's Legends now. How would you do this trilogy? And we want to use Luke. We want to use Leia. I said, okay, well, then what you got to do, it's 30 years later. You got to see the height of the New Republic, and you got to see Luke running his Jedi Academy. You meet, okay, we got to use this guy's Ben Solo. Okay, this is Ben Solo. Ben Solo is his apprentice, and you watch him, you know, training Ben Solo, and then you see the rise of this mysterious new terrorist group, you know, the First Order that's attacking the thing, and then there's this Snoke figure, and you see in the first movie the seduction of Ben Solo, who is sent by Luke Skywalker to infiltrate and find out the First Order, and then he ends up going over at the end of the movie to the other side. Like, oh my God, how is Luke going to solve this? And they got this young, scrappy Rey that we can see is going to become his new apprentice. And so the next movies are how he works with Rey to try to save Ben, and you know, and so you see the unraveling with him trying to preserve what he fought for. I could make a trilogy of that work, right? You know, but without in any way changing or losing what he was at the end of Return of the Jedi, but they didn't ask me.
Yeah, exactly. And so we know that before JJ was put on to do episode 9, and we all knew that there was something going on when we see Kennedy firing to get her version of Star Wars, basically. And so we know that there was another script and a first director to episode 9, Trevorrow. And so tell me what you know about that.
Well, I was actually shared the script for Duel of the Fates, which was the original title for episode 9, which is the movie that he had written under the auspices of Kathleen Kennedy as his boss. He was hired. He was, you're going to come in, you're going to direct this, and you know, and the first rule is you can't contradict The Last Jedi because that's canon, and that's my thing. And Rian Johnson's great, and so he did that. And that script was leaked to me. It was leaked to quite a few people. I later discovered, and I think whoever I think someone in Mr. Trevorrow's camp. I don't think it was Mr. Trevorrow himself. Someone who wanted to salvage this gentleman's reputation because he got just ravaged by everybody. You know, he was fired, and people said, you know, it's because he's not a good director. He was going to screw it up. And so somebody said, that's not fair. This script is really good. And so somebody in his camp leaked it to a bunch of us in Hollywood, and I got it. I didn't share it with people at the time, and others did, and that's how it got out there. So I've read it, and it is, and again, our friend Stephanie Janicek and I have had passionate arguments about this because she rejects it all right, because we'll get to her critique in a second, and she can write her critique. But it was a much, much better movie than The Last Jedi. It was, for me, I read it. I mean, for me, as I'm reading it, the script, I felt like I was reading a Star Wars script. I mean, my heart was beating with anticipation as I turned page after page, because it was written by someone who clearly loved it, and the script had fun in it. I mean, BB-8 is in like the first scene, and BB-8 is suddenly a really interesting droid that's doing fun things. You're like, oh, I want to see more BB-8. And then it goes down in this direction where, you know, he accepted The Last Jedi because that was his job, and he would have been fired if he didn't. So it ends with that. But now he essentially gave a little bit of, okay, we've done that, and it wasn't rewriting The Last Jedi. It was simply moving on past it, right? And and the great thing is Rey becomes this complex character who goes through the arc she should have had over 3 movies in 1 movie. It at least grows and develops, right? There's this actual love romance with Poe, which we never saw, which was really effective. We had, you know, Finn becomes this incredibly heroic character that gets, I know, Stephanie says the bar's low. Yeah, but okay, the bar's low. It's better than the Jedi, so whatever. But
I think the bar's higher than The Last Jedi, though.
But I mean, the bar, the Black Jedi's at the bottom, and so this is. I enjoyed it, and Finn ends up leading, you know, this stormtrooper revolt, which is the journey he should have had in any version of this trilogy. If you're going to have Finn, the rebel stormtrooper, he goes back to the stormtroopers and convinces his former brothers in arms to join him against the First Order. So he leads this incredible First Order, the revolt against the First Order on Coruscant, right? So a lot of it takes place on Coruscant. And the most amazing thing is our great who is his unhappy love interest from The Last Jedi, the Kelly Marie Tran's character.
Rose Tico.
Yeah, Rose. The great thing is Rose Tico is the best part of the script. She's great. She's like this, spy infiltrating the First Order, putting herself in danger, and you're like, oh, I want to go back to Rose. Okay, Luke is back. I want to go back to Rose. What's happening with Rose, right? And he took Rose Tico, a brilliant actress, Kelly Marie Tran, who's given a garbage role and then given no role in The Rise of Skywalker, and he gave her a great role, which is a tragedy. I was like, I want to go back to this. And the great thing about the version of what he does with Luke is Luke, who is now dead from the last movie, he was told, you can't resurrect Luke. He had asked. We know Colin Trevorrow asked, can you please let Luke live so I can use him? And he was told no by Kathleen Kennedy. Luke is dead. He's like, all right. So Luke is very active through the script from the beginning. He's basically haunting, Ben Solo. He's haunting Kylo Ren, because that's the thing is the fun part of it is now that he's a Force ghost, Ben can't get rid of him. And so he keeps showing up to taunt Ben. And he's like, Ben can't get this guy out of his life. This guy shows up. His uncle that he was in won't stop lecturing him. It's wonderful, because every time Ben is trying to be this villain, the Force Ghost shows up to hassle him, right?
Yeah, and that kind of goes into legacy with Cade Skywalker, because he is the off character of the Skywalkers. So his father gets the Jedi Temple on Ossus gets ambushed and massacred by the one Sith, and he watches his father die. His father distracts the Sith, so like the Padawans, including Cade Skywalker, can leave with their lives. And so then he grows up. He gets pushed into a smuggling syndicate, kind of like Han Solo grew up in, and but nicer, I guess you could say. But so during his time, he grows. He's like full of emotion. He teeters on the dark side. He has abilities that Anakin wished he had. So that was kind of neat and interesting as well, like to heal someone close from death. And so because he's going on this mental trip and like abandoning his legacy and abandoning the Jedi way and stuff, Luke Skywalker and even Cade Skywalker's father come back, even Mara Jade come back and say, you need to knock this shit off, kind of thing. So it kind of goes, kind of in tandem with that in the lore. So I get it.
Yeah, they were familiar with that. They were clearly familiar. They were very familiar with the lore. Trevorrow had written it with a fellow screenwriter, and it was clear to me that they knew Star Wars lore really well, and they were like, how do we make this work? We're given a disaster. There's no way to fix this. And I think they fixed it. And I think the critique that those who wouldn't be satisfied, I think that would be a minority. I think our friend Stephanie Janicek would be in the minority had this movie been made. I think most of us would have been fine. I think The Last Jedi would have accepted it. Maybe you wouldn't have been fine with it. I think I would have accepted it's good enough after The Last Jedi.
Yeah,
right?
And I think if you're more aware of the EU, maybe not. If you're more into Anakin's arc as the chosen one, because I got to see the script, I got to see it twice, and and towards the end, they're saying that Rey is the one that's supposed to be the balance, and that takes away from Anakin Skywalker's prophecy.
Sure, and that's in directive straight from Kathleen Kennedy. You're seeing that he's with what she's given, But
and
I think
come back from life. She could come back from a Force ghost in the script, but Luke Skywalker can't. Well,
well, I mean, and the thing I'll give it is that the Rey, at least she has a real love story. She has a backstory that isn't Palpatine, and the thing she's not a Skywalker because that's the rule. It was given to him. You can't make her Skywalker.
I think Solana is her
Solana
name.
was her. Yeah, so she has a lineage we don't really care about, but she has a separate lineage, right? And there's actually at the culmination of it, Kylo Ren beats the crap out of her. I mean, she's left with life-altering. I think she's blinded. I mean, she's
bleeding from her eyes. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, she's blinded, and they don't heal it. I mean, she's blinded, and so that's your main character. She's got lost her eyes in a lightsaber battle, and she still has to struggle on through Act 3 without her eyes, right? And so that, I mean, now Rey is no longer super Jedi. She can't see, right? And she still has to make it work. And so I could probably think that was again, Kennedy was like, well, you can't you can't make her lose a battle with you can't make her lose her eyes, right? And and out he went. And I think most of us most of us would have been satisfied. Everyone wouldn't be satisfied, but I think a lot more people would have been satisfied than were the Rise of Skywalker, which achieved nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and yeah, it's definitely saying that. I think the script undermines Han and Leia, which is a sin. It fixed Luke, but not his sister or Han. Actually, the script, Leia is very significant because it was written when she was still alive. Yeah, and she's a major leader in this, so she's really significant. And Han, I think Han comes back as well in some kind of vision. I'm trying to remember if I'm confusing that.
Yeah, it's a flashback kind of deal. Or something like that.
I think they used it.
Mm-hmm. And I love how they describe her in the script because they say her hair is long and graying and she's wearing white, and she's the one in the whole galaxy that has seen so much death and pain in her life, and yet she stands strong.
And there's this incredible moment at the end with R2-D2 when it's all over and the First Order, shocker, spoiler, the First Order is defeated. And it's Rose Tico that defeats the First Order in this brilliant way. Whatever, that's a whole other thing. She's the one that actually essentially puts the blows of the First Order out, with getting the missiles into the port, whatever. But when it's all over, there's this great moment where R2's been very severely damaged. You think R2's dead, but they're able to fix R2, right? And there's this incredible moment where Leia is fixing R2, and then R2 suddenly projects everything that he's ever seen. Because R2 is the witness of the entire journey, right? From Anakin to this. And so he starts projecting all of the images from his memory banks going back to the earliest movies. And that would have been this incredibly poignant moment where Leia is watching her father's story, her story as a young girl, and this ultimate vision, because he's re-showing it to all of us through his holographic projector. I mean, I teared up when I read that, because that was bringing R2 his full journey.
I think if you read, was it called Swarm Wars? There, throughout that series, R2 is malfunctioning, and Leia's training to be a Jedi in this series. So this is like maybe 20 years after Return of the Jedi, I believe. But she's all throughout the time frame, she trains and stops because her path is being a senator. Her path is in government. We already know that. But she eventually becomes a Jedi. But in that trilogy, Darkness trilogy, R2 is malfunctioning in his deep core memory, and so they're trying to fix it. And as Luke gets help and they try to fix it, R2 shows Padme and what's going on and what happened between their mom and their dad. They learn about who their mom is during that time frame because of R2's malfunction, and because R2 was a part of the family from the start. He has a sense of valor to protect Luke Skywalker from malfunctioning, from learning the truth about what really happened with his mom and stuff. So I think that you would really like that part.
Yeah. That's great, because that actually brings to fulfillment what my intuition was, because the big question is R2 knows everything. We now realize that R2 knew that Vader was Anakin. R2 knew everything. 3PO had his mind wiped, his brain wiped.
Yes.
Right? R2 didn't. He knew everything, and he didn't reveal anything because he was trying not to. My guess was he's trying not to hurt Luke because he doesn't want to mess up Luke's own journey. And R2 becomes this sort of almost nurturing protector throughout the whole thing. But at least in there, it's actually not intuition; it's being shown, right? So.
Yeah. And so, Stephanie, I agree with you. Yeah. We see in the EU, even all the way up to Crucible, how much Han and Leia love each other and how much they stick together. And even when they lose Chewie in the original EU, when Han goes off on his own because he's feeling grief and stuff like that, they still have that deep love for each other. But when we get into Disney's lore, Han just abandons that, and he goes against his character arc, because we see his hero's journey in the OT to where he goes from this guy trying to figure out being deceived throughout his life, but still wanting to be respectable, still wanting a family, finally getting that and honoring that, to now it's like he goes back to his old ways.
Yeah,
which doesn't make sense to his character arc as well.
I think in part of the many pathologies in this Disney fake trilogy is that they were catering to a lost generation that we're now seeing burn everything down. I mean, so they're like, oh, we can't have Han and Leia have a healthy relationship, because these kids have grown up screwed up families, right, with absent fathers and and nobody to guide them. So we got to give them that. Like, no, you don't got to give them that. You got to give them something to aspire to. If you give them their guard, they just see, oh, Han's just like my deadbeat dad that I haven't seen since I was 5, right? I mean, that's nothing to aim for. It's just, and it doesn't raise the human heart, right? That was one of the many pathologies of this. And yeah, I think there was a question about Darth Plagueis that I saw there. I wanted to actually answer, because there's a lot of misinformation about how Darth Plagueis is handled in this unseen script by Colin Trevorrow, which is
Oh yeah, and I wanted to talk about that. Yes. Okay, go ahead, and then I'll add.
Okay, so there is a moment in the script where Ben Solo or I guess Kylo Ren is trying, it basically goes back to the planet where you had the mother, the father, the father, the brother, the sister, whatever. Okay, they don't actually show up in the script, but it goes back to, I think, to the world of that. And then there is someone that's identified as Plagueis's teacher, which is a little in the script, because Plagueis would have killed him to become Plagueis. Whatever, I don't understand that, but he was identified as Plagueis's Sith teacher, who he communicates with, this really scary, ugly alien who gives him the clues he needs to deal with, right? And so people misunderstood that in some of the early leaks of it. They thought, oh, they're erasing Darth Plagueis as the teacher of Palpatine. That's not true. We actually met Plagueis' teacher. The critique is, well, Plagueis' teacher shouldn't be alive. He should have been killed by Plagueis.
Yeah, the rule of two, he should have been dead. And so that's where it kind of deconstructs the rule of two.
Yeah, that for me, I was like, that was where they're like, let's just get the boss off our back and try to get this through, right? I also follows the Lord. Like, okay, let's just get this through the system. Yeah.
Yeah, and then when Kylo Ren in the script, when Kylo Ren views the holocron that has Palpatine talking to Vader about Skywalker and saying, if he does kill me, then go ahead and take him to Tor Valum because he was my master. That's where that comes to mind, is like Palpatine,
that's where the
master
comes from.
Yeah, and
that's a good question. Yeah, I'm sorry.
And that's where the questions come from, is that, and then they said, Tor Valum, when he talks with Kylo Ren, he's like, what about Darth Plagueis? And he's like, screw him. Yeah. So there's a lot of confusion in that. There's a lot.
I think that was one there that even I, as a Reddit, said, okay, I understood the lore enough to know this guy shouldn't be around, shouldn't be alive. I mean, if we're dealing with a Force holocron of him or whatever, then that had the information, but the dude's actually alive, right? And so it was a little confusing, but it is what it is. And like I said, after the garbage of The Last Jedi, I will take it for the. I don't think I could have written, and I think I'm a great screenwriter. I don't think I could have written a better script under the rules that I would have been placed under by Miss Kennedy, and I think they did the best they could. I don't think any version of that story could be better under the rules, the ridiculous rules placed upon them. And whatever, it is what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that too, and there is discussion, because they're like, oh, well, the EU is no longer, valid. We're going to toss it to the side. And that really alienated a lot of fans, like I said previously. And then they start bringing stuff in. And to me, as a person who grew up loving and adoring the EU because of the movies and stuff, and really expanding on the lore and seeing the significance of it as, something that can reflect a mythology type thing for our cultures that everybody across the board can relate to. Seeing them bring in characters like Thrawn, was kind of like a slap in the face, because your lore is invalid that you grew up with. But here's Thrawn. We're going to hand you a little bone here, and it's not the real Thrawn. It's just a skeleton or just a shell of him, because he's not the same character that we see developed in the original lore.
Yeah, and I mean, when I saw Thrawn was coming back, like I think he appeared in Rebels and whatever, I was like, come on, guys. Shows that you're so intellectually bankrupt, right, that you can't come up with a better character than the original Thrawn, and you got to do a shadow of that Thrawn. And then again, I won't read the new. I've heard that the new Thrawn books in this new fake Disney timeline are pretty good, because the same author wrote them. But I'm just going to stick with the original Thrawn that I like, because that's real Thrawn.
Exactly. Exactly. And the original Thrawn didn't have to be a tactic fighter. He was a tactic brilliance that used art to understand cultures and people. And he didn't have to be a trained fighter or, martial artist or whatever you want to call him, because he already instilled fear in people just by his commands. And I think
Well,
that's
fear and loyalty. That's the genius of those Thrawn books. Is there's that great moment where there's these two scenes, the brilliance of those books. There's that one scene in where he punishes a rebellious soldier who he can tell isn't who's not going, and just kills him right there in front of all the other troops, like sort of like Vader style, right? But then later Luke is escaping them, and this one soldier who's terrified of Thrawn goes out of his way to try to stop Luke, and actually damages his hyperspace jump. And so Thrawn confronts him because Luke escaped, and he's like, so he got away from you, and he lists, and he's like, and the soldier is ready to be killed, and Thrawn promotes him because he's like, you went out of your way to get that guy, right? And I'm so proud of you for throwing everything you had at him. And then at that moment, the entire crew was on board with him. He was their leader. They loved him. That's why I love Thrawn. He's not really a villain. He's someone he's like Napoleon. He's a conqueror. And you can either like him or dislike him based on whether it's how it's affecting you. But he's not an evil guy.
Yeah, he didn't have to use brute force, just like what this says. He didn't have to use brute force to gain respect. That's why he says, I'm not like Vader and I'm not like Palpatine. I am not going to rule by that fear kind of deal. And stuff. And so that's another reason why I love the original Thrawn versus the one that Zahn brought in. Zahn could have created a whole new character.
Yeah,
with his brilliance,
he's been paid the money and being told these are your rules. You're going to do you're going to do what we tell us, and he's a brilliant writer who's like who took the money and ran. So God bless him.
Exactly, and just like Master Jedi Luke Skywalker, or Grandmaster, I guess you could say Grandmaster Skywalker, and Kathleen Kennedy said there was no source material. So where did they get Thrawn from?
Yeah, I mean it's comments like that that's so tone deaf. She knows that there's 50 odd books and comics and all. She knows she's not that disconnected from the company she's allegedly running. But that kind of smug comment is put out there for the average moron who doesn't know anything, right? And for these young tear it down idiots, right? Who don't care that there's 50 other things. Like they'll burn every statue to the ground, right? They don't care. And so it's being made for the lowest common denominator, that kind of comment, and it's disrespectful.
Yeah, and Soul Assassin has a point here, and like if you're familiar with when George Lucas was in reins of his company, there was G canon, so that was the foundation of the lore of the movies, and then you have your C canon, which was the EU, and that includes like the old Ewok cartoons, droid cartoons, all of that, and even games and stuff like that. And then they had it in canon, which Infinity's portion of Star Wars, the what if stories happen. That's probably where they should put it, because then it's an alternate, what if stories of what would happen if this is how Luke Skywalker was.
Yeah. If we were living in a universe without logic, this is how it would have gone, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like people like I encounter a lot of like anti-EU people who, come up with like every single thing to say in regards to George and the EU and stuff like that, and that the stories were not consistent, they were a mess or whatever. And what is so funny is that, I think I've even heard Hidalgo say that at one point, because he's got to toe the line, just like a few of them have to do.
Well, I think it's more than that. I think Mr. Hidalgo, is a true believer. I think Timothy Zahn told the line. I think Mr. Hidalgo loved what happened and is really upset that it's getting unraveled.
Yeah, but the thing is like this is a hypocrisy on his part. He wrote this Reader's Companion, which put every single like EU novel in the timeline, showing that the EU was very consistent.
Well, that's why people feel he betrayed Star Wars. People feel that he was this guy that came in and stabbed everyone in the back, because he wasn't an ignorant buffoon. He did this on purpose. Yeah.
And so what have you heard about that guy in general and what do you know?
I haven't heard anything about him in a year. I mean, and Stephanie, I think, has said on her channel that he was pushed out. I mean, I get a lot of these guys are still collecting paychecks at home, and they're just like, now we're all working from home, but they're all like, just here's your paycheck, don't come into the office. And I've been there. Like when I used to be the head writer for the Tron animated series, and then I made the stupid decision to confront my Disney executives about mismanagement, and then they just fired me. Right? So I was out. But they had no basis to fire me, and they didn't really want to make me an enemy, and so they simply said, you know what, keep collecting checks, just don't come into the office. I was like, all right. So I got paid out the whole season. I got 6 more months of checks and again, right? And I watched the show that I love being sent off a cliff without me, but God bless, whatever. So, but that's how that happened to me. You think if Disney's not going to say we're going to keep sending you your paychecks, just don't come into the office? That didn't happen to Hidalgo and the rest of the story crew. That's what happened to them, right? And so you don't hear anything about these people.
Yeah, exactly. So with you on Star Wars, who is your absolute favorite character? Like you can even say movie wise, like PT or OT or both, or even in the EU, or like just a combination of all. So who's your favorite character?
My favorite character is Leia. I mean, because I'll be honest, the first movie that I saw in the theater was Return of the Jedi. I must have been like 12 or 13 years old, right? And Leia in the gold bikini, I hit puberty right there. I was awake. That was it, right? And I was like, oh my God. But her character in general, I mean, she's a character you fall in love with because the first time you see her, she's got the blaster, right? And I mean, the first time you see her, she's taking out stormtroopers. That's what, she's not. I mean, she's the princess, but she's the princess who's kicking ass from the first time you see her. And then you see her confronting Vader, right? You see her confronting Vader, and everyone, I mean, Vader, even then, is a scary dude. He's a scary guy. And she's like, only, Darth Vader, only you, would have the audacity to do this kind of thing, right? And this is, she's like, she comes up to his waist and she's talking now. And so, this is, and the fact that, she got tortured by Darth Vader with a scary needle torture thing, right?
Yeah.
And she still doesn't break. She watches her planet be destroyed and she still doesn't give up the rebels. I mean, this is an incredible character. And and watching her struggling with her emotions, Empire Strikes Back, and falling in love with Han and being unable to deal with that and all of that, right? And then finally seeing her come and rescue Han and then throwing back his favorite line at her, I love you, I know, right? And she does that, right? And so it's such a brilliantly written character. It is such a character that you care for. So when you see her floating in space and and it's just like, what's happening here? This can't be happening, right? This can't be the ending of this incredible character. When you see The Last Jedi, this can't be possible. I'd rather she had been killed in that explosion, and you see her floating in space, and that's and that's her end, and there's a dignified end to that. I would have preferred that than the moment because
she became a meme. Yeah, the moment she became a meme.
I obviously by the time the movie premiered, she was passed away. And one of my greatest regrets is this, and this is one of my greatest regrets in life, is that Carrie Fisher was doing a book signing at my local Barnes and Nobles, and I missed it. And she passed away the next week. I thought she's done a lot of these book signings in LA. I'll go to the next one.
Yeah.
And she passed away on that plane the next week. And so I missed my one chance to get an autograph from Carrie Fisher. And this is a great regret of mine. But she had passed, and I watched Last Jedi, so I assumed, well, she's not going to survive this movie. She's dead, right? And so when she got blown out, I was like, all right, well, she's dead. And I felt this poignant sense of she's out there, she's got her frozen grave in space, right? And then her eyes open. I'm like, what? And then her finger moves. And then she's Mary popping all the way back. And how the hell does she get inside the ship without decompressing the whole ship, right?
And then getting sucked out. That was the problem with that as well.
I mean, he knew enough that it made no sense that he cut from that scene. Like literally, they're like she's floating in the wreckage outside the ship, and they're like an airlock, and you see them open the airlock, and you see like gas erupt, and then they cut because he knows there's no logic to them actually opening that door.
Exactly.
So he cuts out of it.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm gonna, add a little bit of like humor and stuff to this. But I love the fact that you can relate to a female character who is white and not of your culture. Because, like when everything first started, coming out and people are like, Kathleen Kennedy was like, we have to bring more females. We have to do this with more females. Female this, female that, female that. Because
nobody can identify with someone unlike themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, no one can relate to Luke Skywalker, especially, female fans. Luke Skywalker is my favorite character, my hero, and I still love him today. and yet I'm a Native American woman, and he's a white guy. You know,
You don't get more white than that, blonde dude, right? Don't get more white than that, right? And you know, in some ways, if I were one of these as social justice warrior morons, I would say, how can you support him? It's clearly an analogy of white settlers taking away Native American land, you know, on Tatooine, right? With the Sand People. That's clearly the analogy, right? And so how could you're supporting somebody who's clearly John Wayne coming in and pushing you out of your land? It's like, well, you can interpret it that way, but why would you? What's wrong with you to interpret it that way?
Exactly. And so I just love that. And I love the fact that, you know, you're like, oh, I relate to a woman. She was my favorite character. And that's how it should be in mythology, in fantasies. It shouldn't matter the color of the skin, or the gender, or the species, or whatever. It should just be how you love how their story unfolded and how they are in the story.
It's our common humanity. And the very fact of their difference, of their experience, is what makes me learn and grow. I'm never, despite the current world where you can identify as whatever you want, I'm never going to know what it's like to be a woman. It's not going to happen for me. So I learn from talking to women, from watching women in movies, reading books, and that expands my humanity. You know, that's what it is.
And so how do you think, what is your opinion on how she was portrayed in the Galaxy of Adventures cartoon? That we see her, they're making her more of the hero in the forefront of like A New Hope in that cartoon, making Luke and Han look like babbling fools. So what do you think about that? Since that's
I never watched those cartoons. I saw those clips that everyone saw, right? And those clips offended me, right? That whole, I mean, they're taking an iconic moment, that iconic moment where they're both stuck on the landing, and you know, and Luke has to swing her across to the other side, right? You know, that's an image that they recreated in Return of the Jedi. It was so iconic, right? When he swings across on the ship on Tatooine, right? So, and they take that and then they make him this bumbling buffoon who gets wrapped up in the wires and whatever. I'm like, well, why would you do that? Why would you take such a wonderful, iconic moment that the creator of the show, of the movie, loved so much, he did it again? You know, because it's so iconic, right? And then make this buffoonery. It doesn't make her stronger. She while he's doing this, she's taking out stormtroopers, whatever. You don't.
She's covering for him, just like she covered for Han on Endor. She was covering for him. They were always rescuing each other in the lore, in the OT.
And she shows, and she established when she beats Han for the first time. She's like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Give me the blaster. I'm gonna take these guys out. Oh, you don't know what to do? All right, boom. Let's go down that way, right? You don't need to do these things to these characters. They're perfectly balanced.
Exactly. And it's just for, you know, what the society is, the changes that are trying to go on in society today to, you know, meet the needs of these kids who really don't need that. They do need what they see in the OT right now.
Yeah, they need something to aspire to. They need hope, a new hope, right? They don't need to see that people are screwed up and elders don't know what they're doing, and and life doesn't really have any meaning, and you just have to bumble through it, which is the message of The Last Jedi. That's their lives. Guess what? That was their lives in the 70s too, when the first movie came out. People had just gotten out of Vietnam. These hippies were lost, right? And culture, people had just, Nixon had calmed down, right? And no one believed in institutions anymore. It was a very, very nihilistic time in the mid to late 70s. And The New Hope appears, right? And gives them hope in a world where people don't believe in ideals anymore. Everyone's on the 70s drug trip, right? And they give them that. And then that suddenly is something everyone wants. This is the message for this generation. They don't need to see the world being set on fire by morons, because they're already doing that.
Yeah. And just like Luke Skywalker says, Mark's thought on Luke, he is every boy or girl who yearn for adventure, who think that this can't be all there is. There.
And now in The Last Jedi, in the Disney trilogy, we're given the world is small. This is all there is. The world you're trapped in, where everyone's talking about identity and all this other stuff, and you can't trust, there's no wisdom from the past to learn from, elders are morons. That's an empty world where you got no foundation to build something from.
Exactly. And so everybody's all chiming in on here with their favorite characters and what they think. So Matthew, the film, aka the Disney trilogy, did not even reference or care about the lore in Disney's own novels and comics. No outline tying to the trilogy together, not a single story thread. And I have pointed that out before, because we see Leia training Rey in Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah.
But when you go and read, and I read the book Bloodline, which happens in a timeline that's like maybe 5 years before the sequel trilogy, she refused training as a Jedi and learning techniques in the Force to, hone in her abilities from the start. Luke only trained her on innate sensibilities like telekinesis, just a little bit of it. And so she refused training altogether. And
she wanted her own journey. She didn't want to be trapped by this legacy that had pulled in her father and her brother.
Yeah, she was ashamed. She was ashamed of her father or being Vader's child. She was, ashamed of being a Force user in a sense. And her legacy was in the Disney timeline as a senator, as someone in politics, as a leader. And that's where she made her decision. And then also, bam, we have her training. And also, bam, the Force ghosts of Yoda and them came and started training her. And so that kind of took, some people who know the lore out of the experience of that. Those who don't know the lore.
Yeah, and you're right, Laura, because the lore that we were describing, the canon lore to me, which is that she wanted to distance herself and she was ashamed of her father, which I believe in one of the EU books, you'll remember the title, where she actually sees Anakin. And
Truth at Bakura. And then that led up to Tatooine Ghosts, where she learns the truth of her father and then accepts who she is. And that's where she began her training, but it still took her like 10, 15 years to become a Jedi Knight, because
and at that moment she sees Anakin's Force Ghost for the first time, felt so real to me. She basically tells him to go to hell. She doesn't want to be, she doesn't want to forgive him. She even said, she said, I can forgive that you tortured me. I can forgive that you killed my whole planet. I won't forgive that you tortured Han. We didn't do anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That's her love for Han. And you see Anakin fades away ashamed. He's ashamed. And that's a very poignant moment where Anakin's Force Ghost that we saw at the end of Return of the Jedi tries to reconcile with a daughter he never knew, and he fades away. She hurt him. And that really touched me in the book, because that's a realistic reaction. And it's the reaction that comes off of Return of the Jedi, where when she learns that Luke is Vader's son, she's disgusted. She's like, father. I mean, it's repulsion on her face, right? And then the horror starts crying when she realizes, well, I'm his sister, and so that's my father, right? And run away. Oh, you don't have to save him. She doesn't want to save him. She's like, no, forget about this guy. Forget about Vader. Don't save him.
Run.
That's a realistic arc of a character who hates Darth Vader and isn't ready to forgive him. I can accept that she doesn't want to be involved in the Force. What they did with it doesn't make sense based on what we saw.
Yeah, and I don't know if you read Tatooine Ghosts, so pick it up. If you
People tell me it's one of the best books. People tell me it's incredible.
Yeah, and especially since she is your favorite character, you will get to see her learn about Shmi Skywalker, learn about Anakin as a young boy, and how much of an impact he left on Tatooine as a young boy. It's amazing. And then she learns about the truth about what happened to Shmi.
I'm going to put it on my shopping cart right now, Tatooine's Ghost, because I have to go get it.
Yes, and you can get it on Audible, but it's abridged, so it's not the full story. It's plot heavy, but it's not the full story. So
I don't do Audible. I got to read books. For me, I'm a writer. Words are sacred to me, and I got to feel the physical book in my hand. So I don't like this Audibles, and I don't like this electronic book stuff. So.
Yeah, and Luke Skywalker says they don't mention Anakin Skywalker's name once in the sequel trilogy. Exactly. As far as I know, they didn't. So, and I think that was done.
They mentioned Vader. They mentioned Vader, and they say the helmet or whatever, but they never mentioned Anakin at all, to my knowledge.
Yeah, and I think at this point, they should remember Vader for the legacy of what he created during the Empire, what he did during the Empire. But they also should refer back to Anakin as the chosen one, and what had really happened with Anakin as a lesson too, as well, and as well as being the chosen one. So, but that's just me.
Well, they screwed all of it. They screwed all of it up, and they know they screwed all of it up. And so all the battles that we've been doing for the last 3 or 4 years now to try to save Star Wars were not in vain. They worked. I mean, we actually, the Fandom Menace, changed history. I mean, we took on the most powerful corporation on the planet, and we made a change. I mean, that's remarkable.
Yeah. Exactly. And so yeah, get that book and then let me know what you think of it. So once you're done reading it, it's a very good read. I absolutely love it. I absolutely love her journey on discovering Shmi's data journal that Shmi left, and her discovering exactly what happened with Anakin when he slaughtered the Sand People's tribe there. And then also, just with her feeling Obi-Wan Kenobi's, emotions that are ingrained and imprinted on Tatooine from him, having to go into exile and stuff. Yes, very, very compelling story. So why was Hayden?
Okay.
Oh no, I'm reading Matthew Gaudet's, and then hold that thought. Matthew Gaudet. Why was Hayden a disembodied voice in Rise of Skywalker? Anakin should have appeared to Luke, not Yoda in The Last Jedi.
Well, I mean, from what I understand, I think he was filmed. From what I've heard, he was filmed in The Rise of Skywalker, and then even that was too much for Miss Kennedy, and he had to pull him out, right? And you couldn't have any of it, right? And he was pulled out of it, and so all you had was these confusing voices in the air, whatever. You don't even know what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. All right, and Han helps her through it. Yeah, so Han, his love for her helps her find acceptance of her lineage. That's how great their bond is. And that's why
I often feel like Hollywood has written their relationship the way Hollywood relationships work, because those are the dysfunctional relationships I see with people all around me.
Yeah.
They don't actually understand this compelling soul partnership growing and changing as a result and becoming better through a relationship, because that doesn't really work here in LA. It's not really an LA thing. So
like, why should we make ourselves feel worse by seeing this love story go down? Let's just write it how we see it, kind of deal. Yeah, I get it.
Just like what I've experienced. I mean, I often say, and I'm not really joking, dating in LA is hell. I mean, if you want to have your self-esteem destroyed, try dating in the Hollywood system, and then you're like, wow, are people really this bad? They can't be this bad. They are.
Yeah. I've been buying a bunch of bannerless Legends novels for cheap at local bookstores. I choose Legends.
Right.
And that's the thing. Okay, so if you do not want the banner, I respect that. But if you get a book and you have no choice to buy the one with the banner, you know what that does? That tells Disney, Star Wars, where we want our lore to come from.
If they're making money on you, if they see that's where the accountants say, well, look at how much money is coming in through these decanonized books. This is where the money is.
Mm-hmm. And then, like when I go to Barnes and Nobles in a city where I live, the majority of books that are sold Star Wars are Legends. Are Legends, and I always
in my Barnes and Noble Santa Monica, it's the same. There's always these new books, and I haven't picked up one of them. I was like, I tried to go through Aftermath, and I was like, what is this piece of crap? I mean, what is this? I mean, this is garbage. I looked at that famous thing with Abu Nas, who I think is in our chat, where he throws it over his shoulders. One of my great. I was like, good. I picked it up in the bookstore, and I started going through it, and I was like, this is crap. What is this? And I was used to Timothy Zahn. I was used to this high level of quality. I was like, this is what kind of language is this? I'm like, I put it right back.
Yeah, like even Troy Denning too. He's another great novelist too as well. And the more you get into the lore all of the lore, everybody has their portion of the lore that they like. Like I really love post the Return of the Jedi. I am now on my channel visiting the Old Republic because there is a huge Old Republic fan base as well that loves it because of the Knights of the Old Republic and because we see the Sith established in there, and so no matter where you love it, there's great authors in there. Yeah, there's always going to be stories that are kind of like, what's going on here? Kind of deal. There's always going to be.
You can't hit the mark every time. I mean, there's dozens of these, right? You can't hit the mark every time, but they hit the mark a lot, which is more than this, where they consistently don't hit the mark at all with Disney, right? So
yeah.
I will say that I liked Rogue One. I thought that was the closest Disney fan fiction to Star Wars. That was for me. Again, it's fan fiction; it's not real, but to me, it was like, all right, close enough.
And the fun thing is that it is a Dark Forces 2.0. So basically, everything that's in there that mimics, in a sense, Dark Forces, where we have Kyle Katarn, where we have Jan Ors, and Jan Ors. It's funny because they want to represent diversity, so they took Jan Ors, who was an Asian character in the lore, and made her white and called her Jan Urso.
Yeah, and that's what they do. You see, because, and this is from my experience in Hollywood as a minority in Hollywood, people in Hollywood, particularly those that talk all the time about race, are the most racist people I've ever met. They have all these cheap stereotypes of people of color. They won't let you go outside those boxes. And they have this deep white savior complex where you're there, as the brown person or the yellow person or the red person or whatever. You're there. Very rarely is it the black person, right? But they're there in the background to be there while they say, "Look at who I'm saving," right? And the moment you start outshining them, you are finished. And I know that from personal direct experience. And so, I mean, that's why I'm so outspoken against it, because I know these people are racists. I've worked with them, and I know that they are vile people that look down at us while pretending to be our saviors.
Yeah, and we don't need a savior. We don't. We don't. And so Renee,
people have survived a really intense experience, and you're still there. Save yourselves.
Yeah. So Renee Patrick, it's called Tattooing Ghosts. So Tattooing Ghosts. So, and you look it up, add it to your library, especially if you like Han and Leia's journey, especially if you want to learn more about how Leia discovers her grandmother. And it's like kind of like heartbreaking in a sense, because Han Solo's like, "Wow, that's your grandma?" He goes, "I wish I would do my grandparents." And it's just like, in a sense, it's kind of tragic.
So much depth in that.
Exactly. There's so much depth in that.
Well, the one character who, as far as I know, I only read one book with him. I don't know how much he was developed. That I loved was the villain Shizor. Whatever happened with that dude? He was great. Did he ever show up again in the EU? I mean, because I was like, I want to see this dude again.
Yeah, I think before. Okay, so you're probably talking about Shadows of Empire, right? You read that?
Yeah, I really liked. I liked that book a lot.
Yeah, I think he's in other material prior to that. I can't recall the book, so if anybody in the chat wants to expand on that, I just can't remember which ones, but he is a great character, and I love how Leia handles him in that.
Oh yeah, well, the funny thing is, remember all the drama that was about in the Solo movie about Lando being pansexual because he might be banging the droid. I'm like, Shizor banged his droid. He had like that assassin droid, the hot assassin droid chick, and he's like, "Yeah, I used to have sex with her, but I got bored with it." I was like, "Okay, this is an interesting character." He's banging his droid.
Maybe it's okay for aliens to do that.
I was like, "Bring back the hot blood, droid assassin chick. Bring her back."
And I love how she's like, the only one that matches me is a Jedi, and so she challenges Luke. I love that so much in that book. That's a great character arc for Luke as well, and I just love how it expands on how Luke learned more about the Force, and how Obi-Wan prepared to, teach Luke even outside of the physical realm.
Yeah.
And how he left him a journal, and how Luke learned how to construct his own lightsaber, and how he tested, how he still was doubtful when he was testing it, because he's like telling R2, "Go elsewhere, because if this thing
blow up," I remember that. This thing might blow. Yeah, you don't know what's gonna happen.
You could tell people that this idiot, wannabe Jedi couldn't construct his lightsaber right, and basically vaporized himself. So I love this arc.
Mm-hmm. That's real, and that fills in gaps in our understanding in a way that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So with the EU, because I know you've read maybe a few books.
I've not read as extensively as you have. The ones I've read are like, yeah.
Yeah. So which one did you like out of the ones you read?
Well, I have to say, I mean, I actually really loved the Thrawn trilogy, because that was the first thing, and I fell in love with Thrawn as a character. For the reason I talk about is that he's not a villain, and there's a universe where Thrawn wins, and it's actually a decent galaxy, right? Mm-hmm. Because he creates an ordered galaxy based on justice, on his concept of justice, but it's not Palpatine's sense of absolute power, right?
Yeah.
And I really, and so when at the end of the trilogy, when he's killed, right, when he's assassinated in that surprise move, right, I think I didn't pronounce it, Ogre, I think that's how you pronounce it, right, and then he's stabbed, and then and that moment where Pelayon looks and realizes, oh my God, he's dying. He's looking back and sees he's been stabbed and he's dying, and he just smiles, and he's good with how he's gonna go. He smiles and says he was done so artfully, right, because he's an artist and he loves art, and he's like, this whole plot to kill me was planned over many months and was done perfectly, right? Because nobody had figured out he betrayed them a long time ago, and they hid it until they could get their moment. And he was like, if I'm going to go, at least I was killed by a worthy adversary who planned it with art. No, and I was crying, and I read that scene. I didn't want Thrawn to die.
You're like, no. I get it. And then you haven't read the Thrawn duology. So that is
the one that's set in the new universe.
No. This is still in
There's
Legend.
one set in his book. Okay. I'm not familiar with that.
It's the Hand of Thrawn. So there's the Specter of the Past and Visions of the Future. Yeah. And Visions of the Future is where Luke proposes to Leia, or not Leia, geez, Mara Jade. And
that might work in the new incest might be cool for this generation. They're all screwed up. You can go with it, right? They're all
right. But yeah, but in there, Thrawn prepares to come back as a clone, and so it's a very interesting story and how they bring it back, and there's so much depth in that. So if you're interested in the Thrawn stories, you might be interested in that. So there is a lot of political.
Timothy Zahn book. Are they Timothy Zahn the duology? Okay, so he knows his character well.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of political intrigue. There's a lot of then it goes back to the lore to where they're searching for a document, and they talk to a person who encounters Yoda on Dagobah. And I'm not going to try to spoil too much, but basically we know, because right now the rumors in Disney Star Wars is that Yoda wanted really to train Leia and not Luke. Well, in the lore, he was preparing to train Luke, and he told that person that he can't help him, that he's preparing for his most extensive mission within 100 years. Okay. And then so they tie that back to Luke. They're like, oh, it must have been Luke Skywalker. He was
so that shows some caring for the lore and the craftsmanship. I like that.
Yeah, exactly. So it goes into political intrigue. It goes more into like world building. It goes into more like understanding where Yoda was and understanding like other. It also has other Force societies in there too as well. So because the Jedi and the Sith are not the only ones that use the Force, and are not the only ones that the only type of Force societies. There's different Force societies.
The Night Sisters and all that, right? And so so that brings us to a discussion about religion. So, it's interesting. I'll tell you, I was up, and I didn't get it, obviously. I was up for the job of head writer of Clone Wars when it was being developed, right? Okay. And I met with Dave Filoni. So I went through the interview process, and I was like, and I got through that all the way till there's Dave Filoni, and one of the producers from the Star Wars movies was in the room. I was like, I can't believe this is happening. I know Filoni's worked with Lucas, and he was told that whoever is going to be the head writer is going to go. They're going to have to be able to go and move to San Francisco for a while and the Bay Area, and because we're going to be working directly with George on this. I mean, I was like, wow. I got to do this. I didn't get the job. And afterwards, it was interesting because when I was working on Tron, somebody on Tron had worked on the Clone Wars and had known Filoni and whatever. And they said, yeah, you were doing really good in the interview, but then you started getting really deep into your understanding of the Force. And it was a little more sophisticated than he had thought about it. And he's like, is this guy going to outshine me in front of George? And you were kind of done, right? And so that's the story. And, that's a story that was related to me, but I had started going to this in-depth. I know exactly what happened. I started telling the story of how the Force is based on what George has said in interviews. It's based on Eastern mysticism. It's based on Taoism. George actually has studied Sufism a lot. He knows the Middle East well. He filmed it in Tunisia on purpose. There's a lot of Sufi Islamic mysticism in Star Wars that people don't know, but George knew it. And so I started making all these references to the light side and the dark side of the Force, using the Taoist symbol for the yin and the yang symbol, right? And I started going deep into it, and I could see, Filoni's like, and he was just like, I was like, oh, I think maybe this wasn't where I should have taken an interview, right? Because I got so passionate about it, right? And I could just see it was like, what is this guy talking about, right? And so, but the interesting thing, and I want to say something, I've said this is going to be controversial. The interesting thing, because we talk about the Force is female, right? Mm-hmm. As per Kathleen Kennedy's nice T-shirt. So if the Force is based on the yin-yang principle of Taoism, which we've seen the symbol, right, which is the white and the dark, and there's two like little things, right? Okay.
Yeah, yin-yang, yeah.
Yeah, yin-yang, right? And so within that symbol, right, the interesting thing is this, the traditional Taoist understanding it is that the yin, which is the light side, is masculine, and the yang is feminine, the dark side. So the dark side of the force is female if one goes there, right? Because it is the one that more.
You can't have that in the new lore, though.
But I'm saying, but it's interesting because the logic of Taoism is that yin represents consciousness and yang represents emotion. And I think it's fair to say, maybe I can't say it in 2020, but I think it's fair to say the feminine is more drawn to emotion and the masculine is more drawn towards consciousness or quote unquote rational expression, but detached from emotion. And one could argue the Jedi and the Sith have those two divisions. So the dark side of the force is actually feminine from a yin yang perspective. And that's something that I don't think Kathleen Kennedy had quite thought out.
Yeah, and you know, like that's what I love about the Star Wars lore. And when you go into that, because when you see Luke and Leia born, the male and the female, you know, and one goes more into politics and one reflects more of her father or her mother's image, while the other one reflects the father's image and stuff like that. And that even goes with like even yoga philosophy, because we have the Shoshone Nidra that has the left side is woman energy, and it's also the moon and the nighttime, and we have the male energy, which is the sky, and the daytime, the sun. And so that goes all well, no matter what culture, there's some sort of aspect that reflects on each other with that, and it reflects in the Star Wars lore as well. And that's why you see a lot of like female Sith that are people really connect with, a lot of female Siths in the lore.
Because they understand, because again, they're not lying about their emotions, you know.
Yeah.
You know, if you think about it, there is actually a morality to Sith philosophy. Their philosophy, and certainly when you present it against a Jedi, and that's their critique of the Jedi. When the Jedi say it's all about peace, the first thing, as you know, in the Sith mantra is peace is a lie. And looking at cosmos, is that really false? All of life is in a constant state of struggle. I mean, animals eat each other. You know, we're all trying to survive, and we're all being motivated by our personal passions to survive. And is it wrong to follow your emotions? One way to frame the Sith is follow your heart, follow your dreams. The Jedi are like, give up your dreams for this greater good that somebody else has told you is a greater good, and you got to go with it. So there is a way to frame the Sith as being the ones that are actually saying, you know, be true to yourself. And an interesting way to think about the Sith rule of two, and I'd love to get your perspective on this, because I know the rule of two expanded so much on the EU, right? The Sith rule of two, if you think about it, is every Sith is choosing an apprentice that is capable of one day killing them. And in fact, if the apprentice does not have that in them to actually kill their master, they can't be used as an apprentice. It's, from one point of view, the Sith is a very self-sacrificing tradition. That it is, you have to find someone that has to one day be able to take you on and destroy you, so that the lineage gets stronger and stronger and stronger. So you are just a step in the lineage. Think about that. I mean, you're actually choosing, like, Palpatine knew Vader was somebody that could take him on. And the moment when Vader throws him over is actually the fulfillment of the Sith's journey, when Vader kills him, because that's what a Sith has to do. That's pretty self-sacrificing, and we never had it presented that way, but that's what it is. You know, you're looking for someone that's going to be able to take you out.
Yeah, that person has to progress and be able to kill the master to become the master, and and then so we see that progression from Darth Bane. So if you want to really get into the creation of the Sith rule of two, there's the Darth Bane trilogy that you probably need to pick up too.
After talking to you online, I have it waiting for you right there to read. So yeah.
Okay, so and it's a great story on how that evolves. But when you get more into closer to the OT and Palpatines and stuff, we start seeing the rule of two evolve into the one Sith. And that goes into the comics of Legacy. That's 100 years after Crucibles, after one of the last stories.
The Sith continue to evolve past that because Anakin disrupted. They have to. Anakin disrupted the lineage, so they got to go to the next stage now. Yeah. Yeah,
and so the Sith evolved from before the rule of two. The Sith also had like the Brotherhood of Darkness, where they had their masters or their lords and stuff, and people underneath them, and faction of their Sith society, to where some were warriors, some were masters, and whatever. But there was a lot of infighting where they couldn't evolve past. So when Darth Bane came and realized that, he created the rule of two, to where it was only one master, one apprentice at a time.
Which is
And
a logical thing, because if the Sith's point of view is that all of the cosmos is conflict, which I think is true, then you have to have just one. I mean, the problem with the Sith is they're all conflicting with each other, destroying each other. You just have to have one person that's going to symbolize your conflict with the universe, which is your apprentice, right? And that person, you're training them at the same time, knowing that as you're training them, you're making them stronger, and you now have to protect yourself because you don't want to die, and so you have to make yourself stronger. So it's a constant evolutionary struggle.
Exactly. And so I love I love your story. It just makes me think a little bit more about like how Filoni's knowledge of the lore is when you went in for that interview to be a writer, and that you were basically, you know, outthinking him when it came to the lore, just in one small faction of the lore and the Force, and how the Force can resonate with all societies and all cultures, or all mythological culture and stuff. And he's like, wait a minute here, I don't think so. You know, so
it was clear that it was bigger than his vision of it, and it was outside the parameters of his understanding of it, and that didn't help me get the job, and so I never met George Lucas, and life goes on. That big mountain.
Yeah, and the thing too with that is that you are thinking just like George Lucas was thinking.
Yeah.
So because when you look at the history of Star Wars and the history of what George created on, he created on Mythos, you know, Joseph Campbell. He created it on, like, even inspired by recent events of his lifetime to help flesh out the dark side, or the evil side, or the bad side. And then he fleshed out like even the feminine hero's journey with Leia, which I got to complete that video because I have a part 2 coming out. And there's a lot of factors that and then, you know, the samurai for the Jedi, and, you know, the Western culture that we see in early America as well. He used a lot of elements to help build up this mythos so that we can relate, like anybody from any part of the world can relate to. And that was the brilliance of his creative mind during the time. So you come in and you reflect that, and, you know, Filoni doesn't have that thought process, really.
Yeah, he didn't see it that way. And and the person who told me afterwards, like, yeah, you were a little threatening in the room, because nobody wants. First rule is don't outshine the boss, and he'd be my boss if I were to come into this, right? And suddenly I'm here talking about a level of this cosmos that he hasn't considered. It wasn't a comfortable moment for him.
Exactly. And so I find that very fascinating when you shared the story and stuff, because when you, I mean, you know, there are people who absolutely love the Clone Wars, and good for you guys. I love that. I love that you guys do and stuff. But when you look at the overall story, it kind of unravels the lore. And so that kind of, you know, explains further.
It doesn't surprise you the story that I'm telling with you, based on how you see how that show evolved, you know, because it went on its own path away from Lucas and perhaps didn't fully grasp the lore.
Yeah, and then so right here, Matthew got it. Originally, Gindi was going to do the second Clone Wars series. I wonder what happened. I never found out what happened. So if anybody can let me know, that'd be great. But I love Gindi's Clone Wars because it really reflected the story and did not really deconstruct the lore. And yes, they also worked with George on it. I mean, anybody who worked on the lore somehow, in some way, shape, or form, worked with George. You know, because he's the creator.
Clone Wars would be heavily, you know, George would be in the room. You'd meet with him. You'd have to show him stuff. So, well, one thing I want to ask you is, and I have to start posting them to my Twitter, so I think people pay attention to them. There's a YouTube site I found called Darth Angelus, who's been doing these incredible animated short films based on the Thrawn trilogy, and they're really good. And I don't see anybody talking about them in the fan base. I got to be posting them because they're really good.
Yes. I have shared with them on my coffee chat. I have put them in the link, so I'll put them in the link because I think there's a new one that came out recently.
Like episode 6 of it,
Yeah. And I'm always saying, hey, a new one's out, or I am always myself going and watching them. It's great work. And just imagine if we got like a spin-off show that was off of the Thrawn trilogy. That would bring the entire fan base together, because when Thrawn trilogy came out in the early 90s, that really, or in the 90s, that really got everybody back into Star Wars, because how great Thrawn or Zahn written the lore. And I love the one pivotal point I love about about it, and it's towards the beginning of the book, is when Obi-Wan says his goodbye to Luke. Yeah. It gives me chills still today, because we get an understanding that the Force ghosts are here temporarily. They do have to travel to the spirit world.
Yeah. And there's another journey for them that they're holding themselves back from.
Exactly. He's like, I cannot stay in this state any longer. I must take my journey. It's inevitable. I have to do this journey. And it reflects back to my culture. Like when our loved ones pass away, we mourn them for here, and then we set their spirits free. So whoever's the closest to the person that passed away, they keep like a spirit. They feed them like they're still there. They keep spirit plates out for them. They still talk out like as if they're still in the room. And then we have a ceremony that sends them on their way, basically. And we have like wiping of the tears. We have all of that. And so it kind of resonates with that, because the spirit can't stay in this realm very long. It has to make its journey. And so that was very compelling for me. And it really gives the Force ghosts a sense of reality, I guess you can say, that they're just not, they just can't do anything.
Yeah, there's poignancy. And, Obi-Wan was actually denying himself his afterlife by sticking around. And there's only so much, and there's a feeling I got from that, that by doing so, he's actually weakening his soul in some ways. There's this idea that, the idea that Force ghosts can use lightning and do all this stuff that we saw in the Last Jedi. It's actually, the longer they stick around in this realm, it's actually not good for them. At some point, he's just got to be gone, or his soul is going to dissipate, right? And so there's a point to that he actually put himself through that to stay in contact with Luke.
Yeah, and to see them all come back and Raby, I'm every Jedi. The Force ghost couldn't even possess. That's not part of the Force culture for the light side. If you're a Sith, you can possess, and that's in the lore. But so we have that. So, and now they can manipulate anything and do anything they want. So that really deconstructs the OT, because we have Obi-Wan say, "Oh well, I can't interfere."
Yeah. If you face Vader, you're on your own, right?
Exactly.
And you're thinking to yourself, well, these guys could do this. Why don't you just Yoda go up and do some Force lightning on Palpatine and take this? I mean, Force lightning on Vader. If he'd been able to summon down lightning, Vader's got a suit that can't survive a lightning blast, as we've witnessed, right? And so just do that, he's done. So yeah,
exactly. And so that, like I said, that unravels like even the lore before that with the Force ghosts as well. And where were they in the PT then to help Anakin with Padme then, and all that? Like, where was Qui-Gon during the time to help Anakin with his journey becoming a Jedi and help preventing him from turning?
And the brilliance of that in the original, in the prequel trilogy that Lucas did, is that Qui-Gon is the first one that figured out how to cross back over the other side. And he's still figuring it out. You don't see him anytime. You hear his voice. Yoda hears his voice, right?
Yeah.
But he hasn't been able to figure it out. And you're telling me you go from that to 30 years later, they're coming down lightning and doing this. I was like, that's a pretty quantum leap in understanding this mystical dimension here.
Exactly. And it should stay a mystical dimension, and it should be that the Force ghosts have to basically go back into the Force, and stay there and make their journey beyond the veil, I guess you can say. And it's more relatable because now they can just use that anywhere. Now they could say, oh, well, and then the thing is that where were they for Luke? Where were they for Leia? Where were they? And there's so many questions that comes out from that it just, I don't know. It doesn't sit right for me. It doesn't sit right.
Because, again, we saw it with Mr. Johnson's recent tweet, everyone's talking about where it's, the prequels were children's movies about fascism, which explains why he did what he did with The Last Jedi, which is he doesn't understand that this is actually a spiritual conflict. It's about archetypal struggles within the human soul that Carl Jung talked about, right? He doesn't understand that, and he's not comfortable with it. And so he made all these sort of superficial, ideas in The Last Jedi, it's all about these themes without a story. And it's like, Lucas did themes. All of this is a theme. You just don't understand the theme, because you're just uncomfortable with the spiritual elements of the theme, which a lot of people in Hollywood are largely at this current generation is largely very atheistic, very nihilistic in its worldview. And so you have people that are disconnected from the very deep religious themes. I mean, Lucas' first movie calls the Jedi a religion, right? And so that is something people are disconnected from and frightened of in the current generation of Hollywood. So you can understand why they don't understand what this franchise is.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what causes a separation, because when people go on Twitter or social media or even on YouTube and discuss the overall lore, and you have people come out saying, oh, well, Luke is still in his hero's journey, or he needs to experience failure. And I'm like, well, what happened in the OT during the time?
Cut his hand off. You don't have a hand. He's experienced failure.
Time and time again, he can't even lift his damn X-wing out of the swamp to get off of Dagobah.
So again, this is a generation that's so disconnected from its own heritage. It's got messed up family structure. It's got a lot of bad ideas being presented to it as orthodoxy. And so you have a movie franchise that's created to cater to that lowest common denominator and make it descend further into it. I'm going to say something that's wacky, but I think it might not be totally false.
Okay.
I think that much of the events that we are seeing today, with all the deconstruction of society, I actually think that Star Wars played a role in influencing a generation down the wrong path. I think that Disney Star Wars accelerated this disconnect of knowledge, tradition, of heritage, and wisdom that fueled generations burn it all down. I don't, in the same way that the old Star Wars fueled our generation and maybe another generation, I think the Disney nihilistic Star Wars added something into the collective unconsciousness, which we are witnessing play out in horrific ways in the world today. And that sounds radical, but I don't think it's totally crazy.
Yeah, because like we are here, I'm like, I can, relate with Luke Skywalker because of his hero's journey, and I'm not, white or a male or whatever. And I love his hero's journey. I love like the philosophy of Star Wars that George Lucas gave us. And so the newer generations that we have with the new Star Wars is like very nihilistic. And so, yeah, I really, really do see your point, and do think that, this is a reflection of society, and also they are looking at that too as an example, I guess you could say.
I mean, if your example is kill your father, Kylo Ren kills his father, right? Your example is, burn the Jedi temple down, right? Kill the past. This was an idea that might have existed in this generation to some, but it was an idea that was voiced in an ugly way, in a very influential cultural phenomenon. And I think it had an effect on a young generation. It would be interesting to see how many people, who are writing right now saw The Last Jedi and liked it. That would be an interesting correlation. I think it will surprise people.
Yeah, exactly. And, and then we go into like, Ancient Aliens that we talked about on Twitter a little bit, because you were like, oh, Ancient Aliens. And I'm like, I got to watch it again. But the point is that, before I see your tweet about people, you're trying to cancel culture, Ancient Aliens, I seen it about a year and a half ago, but it was with the native aspect of it, saying that they're trying to reinvent and take away what us natives in the Americas have done with our societies. But when these people think about it, we believed in aliens. We believe in aliens. We believe that they influenced us. When our people die, we believe that the Milky Way is the holy or the sacred road back to the second or the other world or the other dimension. And so we have a strong belief in that.
And so they're not violating the culture. And from watching the Ancient Alien episodes that dealt with the indigenous peoples, they were bringing to light they were actually saying, this is already in indigenous storytelling. The star people and all these myths of the ant people that they have come from a dimensional doorway underground. All of this stuff, we're just bringing to light something that you people in your racial arrogance think is a wacky science fiction idea. These people were saying this 700 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. There's wisdom there.
Yeah, and so it does all go back to that, because we see even those stories being now touched with the council culture as well. And as we see society like tearing down statues and stuff, and a lot of it I disagree with. A lot of it I think that is a way at what we can learn from. Visiting those monuments that are put up is something we can learn from. However, if it's this goes into my spiritual belief and stuff like that. If there's something there that's desecrating your sacred land, and probably some people may not agree with me, and that's fine. I think that there's that the people of that land has the right to say that doesn't belong there. And my people have been fighting against the presidents on the Mount Rushmore, and I'll tell you why. That mountain is one of our most sacred mountains. My people's sacred mountains in the Black Hills. It was Thunderbird Mountain, or it is Thunderbird Mountain. So when that was built, after our land was taken from us, and that was built, they were, carved. That was like a, that was blasphemy, I guess you can say.
I can totally get that. I mean, this is a sacred thing, and you get somebody coming in and carving essentially idols onto it. So I can absolutely understand why people would find that offensive in their community.
And so, so I'm not in the middle about this, taking down historical stuff. But when it comes to like desecrating spiritual places, I don't think that, I don't think it's right for people to desecrate it in no matter which way, shape, or form. And but I do believe that we learn from like monuments and statues that are up. We go and visit the past and what they were significant for, or what had happened. I don't believe those images were put up to cause racism or be racist. And we need to go and focus on the past so that we don't make the mistakes in this future. Future.
What I will build on what you're saying is this: when I look, for example, you've raised a very real Native critique of Mount Rushmore, okay? And that's a very real, authentic critique. My critique of the people talking about it today are largely people that are attempting to co-opt the Native critique. They're attempting to use it for their own political agenda. These people don't care about Native tradition, right? And once they're finished, they can blow up Mount Rushmore. They're not doing it because they actually care about this. Once they're done with it, once they've deconstructed all of white culture, they'll deconstruct Black culture, and they're going to come from Native American culture. I mean, they're doing it in Islam right now. They're using us Muslims as their identity politics before. I'm going to move my so you can actually see me because I got the sun in my face. Okay, so you can actually see that. Okay, so we Muslims are being used as identity culture props. Like the hijab is now a symbol of resisting Trump, right? And and as I predicted when that started happening, the moment that they're finished with using Islam as a sword against Christianity, then they'll be like, well, Islam sucks too, and this hijab is an oppressive thing that's making women cover their hair against their will and all this stuff, right? And they've already started that critique against Islam. And so I'm like, so you same people that allegedly were championing, some of these people are like, well, we support Palestine with you, Cameron. I'm like, yeah, but I know that you don't actually like Palestinians or Islam. So I know your heart is not in the right place.
Yeah.
Or you're using these political things that I care about for an agenda that will ultimately be used against me. So I'm already seeing the discussion of, should we blow up Mount Rushmore? The people that I see of talking about it are largely not natives talking from the perspective that you're talking about, or who even understand the concept of sacred land and sacred mountain. They couldn't even grasp that because they don't believe in the sacred. They don't believe in God. They don't believe in divinity. They don't believe in holiness. And so these are the same people who are like, let's glom onto this. And when we're done with that, we're going to talk about, we feel you natives have a really patriarchal culture, and they're going to come for you. That's what's going to happen, right? And so that's the critique I have, is the people championing the destruction are not coming from a place of authentic critique like you're describing. They're coming from a very dangerous, destructive place that has no stop.
Yeah, exactly. And so we have Tolfer that's asking about, what about Crazy Horse Memorial? The creator of that worked with people from my tribes, and it was a mixed review or bag on that. But a lot of the stuff that is going on the site and the carving, it goes back to help creating scholarships for Native Americans and everything. Now, would Crazy Horse want his image carved in the mountain? I don't think he would, but that's just something that was brought to us through collaborations of the Sioux tribes. And is it right or wrong? I have mixed feelings about that, because again, I don't think that he would want his image carved in. He didn't even want, Crazy Horse didn't even want his image taken on camera at the time. And so we, so they got together with some old leaders and recreated his image. And so when you go there, if anybody has a chance to go there, visit the museums, visit the history about it, visit all of that. A lot of natives benefit from the scholarship that comes out of it. It's all nonprofit. And, you know, I've had many family and relatives perform there in their dance regalias and stuff. So it's kind of like, oh, this is for the, you know, the Lakota of the area. And so that's all I have to say about that. Is like, I do have a mix, as you could tell, I do have a mixed feeling about that. I do.
Well, but you're actually trying to find truth here. So the very fact you're struggling with this means that, you know, this is what we should be doing with everything, because all of history is complicated. All of it, all of us are built, you know, all countries on this earth are built of wiping out some kind of indigenous population.
Yeah.
They're all built on slavery. I mean, they're all, every country on the planet, right, including my Muslim countries, right? We're all built with legacies that, by a moral standard created today, do not hold up to that. And it is, we have to deal with that. And for me, the way you deal with that is through education and conversation. Through destruction, you're releasing these emotions without dealing with the underlying narrative and talking about it. So there's no evolution. You're just creating a destructive force that actually doesn't build from the history, and as a result, history is erased and forgotten, and you can't talk about it. You know, you're taking down Columbus statues from Columbus, Ohio, so you can't talk about Columbus anymore because he's not there, right? You know, if Columbus statue is there, you can point out and say, look, this is what happened when Columbus arrived. This is what happened to the Taino people of those islands. They don't exist anymore, right? Did Columbus wipe out intentionally? That's a conversation, right? But it's a conversation that needs to be had. And if you don't have a historical reference, it's a conversation that goes away.
Yeah, exactly. And so the thing is that we have in society, you know, like knowing that a lot of, like, especially Native American, we're the ones that are in the background that are never spoken about.
Yeah.
And so we're never written, our history is only written by one side so far in the history books. And when I was in high school, I think I was a junior and going to American history, and my history teacher was like, you know, in this time frame, pick an event to write about. So I chose Wounded Knee, and I have family that was massacred at Wounded Knee. So I chose that because then I can compare the history books with oral history.
Of your own tradition, stuff that information passed on in your community. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And through family and stuff. And so I did that. I submitted my paper, and he was like, I never knew about Wounded Knee. Can you believe that?
Wow.
Can you?
And just your teacher?
My history teacher. I didn't know that.
And these are people that are teaching the next generation, right? I mean, that's just a shocking thing, right? And so, well, the good thing is, the blessing is you conveyed information to your teacher, which hopefully opened their heart and made them start learning more, which I hope they did. But that's the problem that we're facing here. You know, this destructive moment we're in will not advance society forward. I'm a student of history. We're at exactly the same moment that we were in during the French Terror, during the Revolution, the French Revolution and the Terror, you know. And what happened at the end of the Terror? All the leaders of the Terror, you know, like Robespierre, were executed by the mob that they created. And then there's a horrific period of Napoleonic Wars where that terror now extends outwards, and half the planet is consumed in war by these fanatics, right? Who are trying to spread their ideals to everybody. And then the end result is the monarchy just comes back. You know, the old guys, everyone's burned out of it. Society isn't advanced, right? I'll give you an example. The Napoleonic Wars, you know, were based on liberté, equalité, fraternity, liberty, equality, fraternity. When Napoleon invaded Egypt, one of the first things he did was impose the Napoleonic legal code on Egypt. And that set women back, because in Sharia law of Islam, women have property rights. They have inheritance rights, right? And under Napoleonic code, women were not allowed to own property. They weren't allowed to inherit. So suddenly, Muslim women in Egypt lost the right to own property that they had for the last 1,300 years from Prophet Muhammad, because the liberty, equality, fraternity, revolutionary crowd showed up to help these poor natives advance their culture and push their culture backwards. A lot of the problems in Egypt today are still attempting to unravel Napoleonic code from Egypt.
You know, that happened here when my people were settled on reservations. They would try to swear up and down that, you know, my culture is a patriotic, or patriarch culture. We were a balance, like women had their purpose, men had their purpose. Okay. So even when decisions were made, the women were counseled first, and then it was given to the men. Then they went and made the ultimate decision, and it was carried out because the men were the protectors.
Well, and they had so on the environment to implement it. That was reality.
Yeah, exactly. And so when we were put on reservations, and women, because of they did the same thing that Napoleon did in Egypt. Women couldn't get land. We weren't able to have land. It had to be everything. They turned everything patriarchal on us, but then they destroyed our men. So this is how they get into a culture and destroy it. They take the ones out who are protecting the social structure, and that's the men.
Who could be the warriors that could challenge you, so you got to get rid of them.
Exactly. And then from there, they took the women's power away from them.
And so you're left with an end result is a community, like you said, the native voices are never heard. People talk on their behalf, and now on Rushmore, they're talking on their behalf, right? I went to a college that was actually founded to educate Native Americans. I went to Dartmouth, which is in New Hampshire, and it was founded in 1769. The King of England chartered Dartmouth College as a school for Native Americans. It was the first ever idea. We'll make a school for Native Americans in the northeast of the colonies and Christianize them, essentially, right? But we'll educate them. They'll read the Bible and they'll learn that and they'll become Christian. And that was the idea. But it was still a school that was chartered for Native Americans. And in the first generation, they actually did have Native Americans come, and then eventually decided we don't actually want to educate the Native Americans. We want rich people from the colonies to come in or whatever, or the first generation of America of the United States came in, and then Native Americans weren't readmitted to Dartmouth until late into the 20th century, right? When there was an effort to go back. The school was founded for Native Americans. It wasn't founded for you guys, right? And so, and my first freshman year, my next door neighbor, he was sort of my roommate, even though we had separate things. We're always talking to each other. He was Native American. And I learned so much about his culture and heritage. He was Penobscot, from the Penobscot tribe of Maine. And I was blown away by what little I knew of the tradition and the suffering that it had endured and the dignity by which it had survived into the 20th century. And so this is something that we have to face. He was talking to me about how natives, my roommate was saying to me how they had done a survey where they had asked different groups, to say, they asked white kids at the school and the black kids and different zones, identify who are the most powerful people in the school and who are the least powerful. Every single group, every single minority group identified the Native Americans as the least powerful. Not one of them questioned that. The black guy, the black student said, oh, on this list of all the groups here, yeah, white people are on top. And some of them agreed. Some people thought black people were just underneath white people. Some thought Latinos were underneath white and black was below that. But every one of them said, yeah, but Native Americans are at the bottom. There was no disagreement about that. Yeah. And that broke my heart to hear that, because it was also true.
Yeah, we are under, when it comes to even reporting racial statuses in America in general, we are not reported. Maybe once in a great while, we are not reported at all. And so when we had the injustice with Floyd, Mr. Floyd, and what happened with him, our native society, our native community in Minnesota and in the Twin Cities basically stood and tried to hold space for everybody there. And by that, and we have a history of activism. We have a history of standing our place without brutality in the modern times. And so we held space for them. We had to go and protect our own businesses in Minnesota during that time of the riots.
Yeah, nobody came to help you.
Yeah, and so our men went out there because one of the native schools got burnt down over there.
Yeah, so someone wrote in the chat as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we had, and I know some people I know a few people in the native community there. In fact, I have family that lives there, and so they stood their ground and stuff. But then they were also encouraging everybody to stand in peace and solidarity. Don't harm others. Don't harm businesses, because this is not how to get the point across.
Well, and that's what Malcolm X said. As you may know, I'm a big fan and follower of Malcolm X. And he said, you look at his videos, he talked about this in the 60s. He said in the 60s that the biggest problem that you white liberals don't want to talk about is, we're having a situation where black people are killing black people and destroying each other's businesses. And I'm trying to stop that. And you guys don't want to talk about that because it doesn't fit your narrative. But that's actually what's destroying my community. And you're fine with that. You're fine with it. You want to talk about white on black, fine. But that's all you want to talk about, because you don't want to talk about this. And you want this to continue on so that my people remain powerless. You want to
exactly.
That's what you want.
Yeah, and so we're seeing this. We're seeing this where people are minorities, like including my people, who are saying, well, we are not properly represented in history, so let's go ahead and tear down history.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how can we learn from that when, in fact, we need to stand together and say, let's put our history in there through the voices of our people so that we have both versions of the history, of the truth in the book, so that the story comes to light in a better, clearer picture.
And that's a solution, because that's a solution that will actually lessen racism. Right? You see, when you attempt to erase the dominant culture's narrative with your narrative, the dominant culture resists that, and then their racism towards you increases. And I use the word dominant culture because currently we think of in terms of white and black, whatever. I come from a tradition that people today have forgotten. The Islamic world was the dominant culture for a vast portion of the last 1,000 years, right? From the 7th century to about the 17th century, talk about into the 1600s. The Ottoman Empire was still controlled half of Europe. The Ottoman Empire was at the gates of Germany and Vienna and Austria, right? And so that was the dominant culture, even when America was, in early colonial society. And so, and I look at the history of Islamic culture. When we were the dominant culture, you had this period in Islamic Spain where you had these letters that archaeologists have found where Catholics under Islamic rule in Spain would write these letters to the church, in the Vatican saying, we're having this big problem. Our kids don't want to be like Spaniards. They dress with these turbans. They want to be like Arabs, right? And so then you have these light-skinned Europeans who viewed this brown-skinned Moorish culture as the advanced culture, and they either tried to co-opt into it or they resisted it. And so I'm aware of dominant cultures, and I've witnessed a dominant culture. Is the Islamic culture went from being the dominant culture to a colonized culture in the last 200 years. So I've witnessed the loss of that, and I've witnessed how that history has been erased, so that Muslims today don't remember they were the dominant culture, and they think of themselves as third world bozos rather than the people. That's why my novels are set in this historical period where Muslims were dominant, because part of it's like, you guys remember when we actually had a great civilization and Europe was backwards, right? So we have to have this discussion of histories. You can't erase one history. You have to then complement that history, and then you can come to truth. But if you erase one, it will reassert itself and it will erase you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the point I'm getting at, is because, we're like, oh, well, we're not well represented in the history books right now. And so putting ourselves in there and expelling the other is still basically, we're hypocrites.
And it won't work. I mean, the idea is people think, I'm like, all you guys, who are out there setting fire stuff, you really don't want to wake up the sleeping giant, right? It's like the Japanese, when that general said during Pearl Harbor, don't do this, you're going to wake up the sleeping giant, right? He said, do not do this. And, we know more of the history that the Japanese actually had a reason for Pearl Harbor. We never were taught that most Americans didn't know that we were actually cutting off their oil supply so that their country was about to collapse. So they're like, if you're going to not let us have oil, we're going to attack you so we can have oil shipping, right? And so there was a reason for it. And but now all these people that are rioting and setting fires to stuff, it's only because they're being tolerated by the white people. Let's be frank here. The moment the vast majority of this country, which is still vast majority white people, decide, I've had enough of this, you're all finished. And I'm talking about myself. I'm finished too, right? You do not want to wake this sleeping giant up. In 10 years and 20 years, people who are talking about Trump being racist are going to look back and go, man, I miss Trump, man. He was a statesman. Because much worse than Trump is coming when you want to talk about, racial identities. People say Trump is a Nazi, like that. I was like, yo, man, you have no idea what's coming. George Bush is a hero now. Remember George Bush killed 2 million people in the Middle East and, took away our civil liberties? He's a hero now. And like Trump is going to be a hero when you see what's coming after Trump if you keep going down this path. And you look back and well, Trump didn't put all of us in concentration camps. This new dude is doing that. I miss Trump. That's what's coming if we set fire to civilization. The people that are the majority will eventually go, yeah, I'm done with you guys. This is like a virus, and the immune system's on now.
Yeah, let me see here. Later, OG Star Wars, Cameron, I am out. We aren't supposed to be talking Star Wars, not religion. Anyways, later, all have a good night. All right, so it goes in tandem, and it's good to discuss things that are, like.
But how can you discuss Star Wars without religion? Okay, I mean, no one is preaching anybody's. I'm not preaching Islam. She's not preaching native traditions there. I mean, God bless you. You can have your opinion, but if you actually care about Star Wars, where the Jedi is a religion and the Sith is a religion, why should you be uncomfortable with that? That startles me, that comment.
Yeah, we're talking about nihilism, basically.
We
That's
talk about
affecting our
philosophies and
overall.
ideologies and worldviews and religion. One does not have to believe a religion to accept that religion is historically been one of the most important, forms of ideology in human history, and one that will survive all of this.
Oh, wow. You live in Western South Dakota and never got to hear a conversation like this. When I go back home, because my tribe is Rosebud Sioux tribe, I am like I said, a citizen or a member. When I go back home, like I was in Hill City with my family, and we're walking down Main Street in Hill City at one point,
Yeah.
and we were getting racist calls called out on us there.
Wow.
Yeah, when like when one time I was in Rapid City going to a Starbucks with my adopted Navajo sis, because our culture is also about adoption, which is kind of like the Mandalorian culture in a sense. Yeah. And so my friend, she's now my sister. She's Navajo, and so we were in South Dakota at my family reunion in the Black Hills, and we were going to a Starbucks, and we were basically, they kept on passing service to us, kept on passing service to us, kept on passing service to us, and even traveling like. Yeah, exactly. And I think this needs to be talked about, especially if you're from an area that is distinctively has a huge indigenous culture, because there's about 5 Sioux tribes there. So we have Pine Ridge, we have Rosebud, we have Yankton, we have Flandreau, we have Cheyenne River, and we have part of Standing Rock. And I have family almost in every single Sioux tribe, even the ones in Canada. And I have a huge family, huge family. And so when you live in a predominantly huge area that has, a great indigenous culture and stuff, and to hear you say you never hear anybody or any conversation like this, that means this conversation needs to be done. That means that the people need to wake up over there. People need to be aware of the indigenous culture. And I'm not saying like go and kiss our feet or anything. That's not what I'm saying. But start this conversation. Get to know the tribes. Get to know the history there. Get to know the struggles and why we are existing today. How we got here today. How our ancestors fought and fought for us for our survival today. That needs to be a conversation there in any place that has any type of indigenous culture in a land that you live on. Knowing is the best knowledge. Having that conversation is the best solution, because then understanding and compassion happens. And then that opens the door for us to understand your culture. Because I'm like me and Kamran here, or, I dance belly dance. I dance a Middle Eastern dance. Yeah. It's my responsibility to make sure I know and honor that culture as a dancer, even though dancing is like an art that can be shared and evolve with other cultures, because that's what that's about. But
and belly dance has evolved. I mean, it started with Byzantine dancing, that became Middle Eastern dance, became Turkish dancing. It keeps evolving.
Yeah, exactly. But as a dancer of a cultural dance that evolved from that specific region and expanded out, because I dance Egyptian style ballet dance, so folkloric rakasaya, which is basically the cane dance, all of that. It's my responsibility to know about the culture, know how to carry myself as a woman in that culture when I am dancing and representing, especially the folkloric dance. And so that conversation needs to be held. Once those conversation is held, there's a greater understanding between cultures, and that needs to be done. And we are not seeing that.
Yeah, and that ties into everything related to Star Wars. And look, anyone can leave this conversation if it's not what you came here for. God bless you, and I hope you find what you're looking for.
Yeah, thank you for coming in.
Thank you, and I hope some of it was of value. But I will never disassociate from having the deeper philosophical conversations, because they're connected to Star Wars, because George Lucas had these deep philosophical conversations, and the movies are about these conversations, right? And so if we disconnect them, which is what happened in the Disney trilogy, is that people walked away from these conversations, and we got a hollow shell of those traditions, and we got a nihilistic version of them because we had that disassociation. I mean, the fight I have in Hollywood is constantly to try to insert spiritual thinking into the conversation, because they're all such nihilistic atheists, my colleagues. It's frustrating for me to deal with people, and they say, well, man, you're a smart guy. You got all these degrees, whatever. You believe in God? Man, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, well, you don't? And so let's have a conversation about that, right?
Yeah.
And And that leads to good storytelling. The reason I was a religion major in college was that the reason religion works, I'm talking about anyone, I'm talking about Islam, I'm talking about Christianity, I'm not talking about Taoism. The reason any religion works is good storytelling. That's why they survive. That's why the Bible works. It's really good storytelling. I know, because we adapt the Bible a lot to make movies, because those stories still work, right? The Quran is incredible storytelling, and and all the great traditions are incredible storytelling. Native religion is passed on through story, right? And what people don't understand is that our ancestors understood symbolism and allegory. Later people might not. So we look back and go, oh, look at these natives talking about these, these mythological stories that don't seem historical. They knew exactly what they were telling. They were telling allegories to convey profound ideas, like Star Wars is an allegory. And they knew what they were doing. You might not be smart enough to understand what they were doing, but they certainly were.
Exactly. And this is like you said, this is a conversation we need. And I think this conversation is severely needed in Disney Lucasfilm in its own faction itself, because there's a lot of failure going on with the mythos that the foundation of Star Wars is built on. And I had a conversation with someone like this about this on Star Wars. And they're like, why should they even adhere to the mythos in the sequel trilogy? Because that's the foundation it's built on.
And that's why it worked, because the mythos is why. I mean, just create something new and call it something else. I mean, create something with a new logic. This works because people fell in love with the Jedi and the Sith and the Force. I mean, it was the Force. Even in the first movie, you don't really see the Force. You see a little. You see what? You see Darth Vader. The biggest thing is Vader chokes somebody, right? So that's it, right? You don't really see the Force. It's just talked about, and the Force is responsible for Luke hitting the bullseye, right? You don't see the Force until Empire Strikes Back, but you're already in love with it. It's what made that movie different from everything else that you had seen before, right? Because it's mysticism. It was about religion, and it was about people that, and Han Solo reflects the critique that we're getting. Han Solo says, I've traveled all over the galaxy. I've seen all kinds of strange stuff, and I've never seen anything that tells me there's one Force connector or anything. And, and he's making fun of all this as superstitious, stuff. And then Obi-Wan tells them, you just don't have the experience to know this yet, but you will. So I mean, the discomfort some people have with talking about these archetypes, that I'd like to explore that without targeting anyone in the chat or anyone else. Because that discomfort is what led to, I think, a failed enterprise with Disney. Is if we in this generation cannot talk about archetypes and religion and can't mention people like Buddha or Muhammad or whatever without making people say, I'm out, right? I mean, man, you're disconnecting from human civilization. You got no foundation to live your day-to-day life, much less create a movie, if you don't have this knowledge.
Exactly. And so we have Vertical Horizon. All of the Jedi becoming Force ghosts regardless of training was ridiculous in episode 9. And that's the thing, that it does take training to become Force ghosts, and that's established in the lore. And that didn't come predominant until later, after the new Jedi Order was established. And it also was the choice of the Force user if they wanted to go out as a Force ghost or just not. And we see that when Mara Jade dies, because she doesn't go corporal or whatever it's called. Her body doesn't dissolve into the Force. She stays intact until they discover who really killed her. So she keeps her body as evidence. And then as the funeral happens, and as her nephew who killed her comes in, and he wasn't invited to the funeral or nothing. As he comes in, she's like, okay, the evidence is here. Now I can start, dissipating and going into the Force. And so we see her body now, who's on the pyre, the body starts dissolving instead of, burning up into ash.
She had fulfilled her mission at that point, and she would be one with the Force.
Exactly. And so that's a choice, but we don't see, we see the evolution, again, the evolution of the history, the evolution of the Force, and it being taught and trained over time in the new Jedi Order that Luke brings about. And we see that all the way back from the PT, like you said earlier, that, Qui-Gon rediscovers, because it's ability that was lost with the Jedi a long time ago, and he relearned it. And so we see that being learned, and then he comes back and teaches, and he doesn't, I guess, I don't know. I think he wasn't strong enough into the Force to fully benefit from becoming a Force ghost. So that's why we never seen him as a Force.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that gives us a different feel of, like, not everybody is the same strength in the Force. Not everybody.
Who knows how much time did he have to learn this method? I mean, he taught it to Yoda, who then had many years to continue meditating and learning, and taught it obviously to Obi-Wan, who had many years to learn that meditation process to become one. And on the Force Ghost, again, the discomfort of not talking about religion, the Force Ghost concept comes from the idea of rainbow body out of Chinese Taoism. It's a religious idea that holy people could learn to achieve immortality so that their body upon death would fade away and become a light body, the rainbow body, which would become immortal, which is what the Force Ghost is. So again, if you don't know religion, if you don't know history, you don't know where George Lucas is getting this from.
Exactly. And so, like I said, it's very compelling, and we get just like with everybody's ability, because we talked about, our abilities in art, like everybody has their own path, everybody has something they're gifted to do. And, mine is art. Like I'm a dancer. I love creating art and stuff. So everybody has their own strength and weaknesses. And so we see that with the Force and Force users. Like, I don't know if you're aware of Corran Horn. I always use him as an example because Corran Horn, he becomes a Jedi Master, but his talent, he doesn't have the talent for telekinesis.
She's got a limit. Great.
But he does have a rare Force talent that compensates for it,
which is a reflection of the human body. People that are born that cannot see, other senses will start compensating.
Exactly. So we see that. So now when we see in the Disney lore, it's like anybody can do everything now. The Force doesn't have to be ability that you train for now. And so that again takes away and deconstructs from the OT and the PT when it comes to Luke's training, and when it comes to like training being established in a traditional setting as the order that we see with, Yoda training younglings and Anakin growing up, because even though he's the chosen one, he still needs to be trained. So it takes away from all that faction. Now anybody can do anything, and that goes in with like the trophy. Everybody gets a trophy kind of society.
And there's a deeper thing here, because my belief is that all of this deconstruction of society that's being done by, I'm going to say it, rich white liberals, okay? The deconstruction of society that's being done is being done to make sure that the certain group of people stay at the top and everyone else stays at the bottom. And how do you do that? If you could have a training process by which people can learn how to develop the Force, then that's upward mobility in society. But instead, if you just have people that have superpowers and other people that don't, right, then you have a class system. And the very people that are promoting that this is somehow, that Rey has all these superpowers is somehow empowering women. No, it's disempowering all of us, because there's no training process by which we can catch up to her. She just has those powers. And that's how the people who are running Star Wars today see it. They see themselves as a superior minority to all these unwashed masses, and that they have the superpowers, which are wealth and power within Hollywood, so they can dictate it for us. It is a direct reflection of their pathology.
Exactly. Wow, we're coming up on 3 hours, so let's go ahead and start winding this down.
Yeah, I got to take care of some stuff, so it's been a wonderful conversation.
Exactly. And I would love to have you back on for some more of that. So thank you everybody in the chat for coming. Yes, we touched all different type of aspects of Star Wars, of religion, of culture and stuff. And I appreciate everybody that stuck through this, listened, contributed in the chat. You guys are amazing. And thank you so much, Kamran, for coming on. And go ahead and tell us where we can find you.
Sure. I mean, you can go to my website, which is my name, www.kamranpasha.com, KamranPasha.com. You can buy my wonderful books that I showed you. My novels are available there. And you can also follow, some people are following me on Instagram, which I don't really have a lot going on there, but you can follow me there. You can find me. I have Twitter. I've locked my Twitter because I got a lot of harassing stuff, because I'm now getting a little more prominent in the fandom menace and a lot of wackos are coming. So if you'd like to follow me, my Twitter is my name, KamranPasha, Kamran Pasha. I have locked it, so just submit a follow request. And if I can see that you're not some weirdo that's going to come at me, I will accept you. And if you prove to be a weirdo, I will delete you. So that's the way it works. But thank you, Lord. I'm very honored to be on this channel. I'm very honored to be able to talk to a very interesting group of people that are here in the chat. And we are people from different backgrounds that I love the fact that we can have these spiritual conversations and we can understand each other. It's very meaningful to me.
All right, thank you so much. So I will put his link in the description in the box below. We have one more question for you though. Does Kamran think The Mandalorian season 2 will help or hurt Star Wars more?
Well, I mean, I think as long as Jon Favreau is the guiding force of Mandalorian season 2, I actually hope and expect that it will be even better than the first one. First one people liked just because it was the end of the train wreck. and that there's still flaws in it. And I think with time now, Mr. Favreau will be able to really get it back onto a track of a Star Wars that we can all say, yeah, this is what we wanted. And that's my expectation of it.
Okay. All right. Again, so everybody, thank you so much for coming. Again, you can find me on Star Wars. I do have Queen Council that's coming on that I'm probably popping on late. I apologize, ladies. So go catch that over on Mad's Mama Bear's channel. And we always have fun, silly stuff to talk about. We like to make everybody laugh. We like to have fun. And we were very serious here, but this is something that, we all need to discuss. And, and also for those who are a huge fan of Star Wars, this is a discussion that we all need to have as well. And I enjoy this talking lore with anybody that's willing to sit down and talk lore with me. I appreciate Kamran very much. And thank you again for everybody in the chat. You can find me Mondays on Midnight After Dark on Toxic Femininity. And then you can find me on Thursdays in Queen's Council going on right now. And you can find me on once a month on Beta Menace, as well as my coffee chats in the morning, Thursday mornings. And then look out for my lore videos coming out. And I am planning on doing once a month lore review of a native movie. And then once a month, I am also planning on doing an question answer, stream for everybody who wants to, talk to me more about Star Wars and ask me questions and stuff. So yeah, so thank you guys so much. I appreciate everyone.